Have you ever noticed how your fear arrives before your thoughts do a sound in the dark? A shadow at the edge of your vision, that sudden feeling that something is wrong even when you know you are safe. It may feel irrational, but it is not. Deep inside your mind, a part of your brain is still living in the Ice Age, shaped by predators, cold, hunger, and the constant possibility of danger. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if this is the kind of mystery, history, and human survival story you enjoy. The fear arrives before the thought. It does not wait for language, does not ask permission, does not pause to consider whether the danger is real. A sudden noise in the night, a shadow shifting at the edge of vision, the brief sensation of being watched. These reactions rise instantly, ancient and precise, as if something deep inside already knows what is coming. The heart accelerates, muscles tighten, attention sharpens. For a fraction of a second, the modern world falls away, and something older takes control. There is no predator in the room, no movement in the dark that carries teeth or claws. The walls are solid, the doors locked, the environment controlled, and yet the body responds as if none of that matters, as if safety itself is only a temporary illusion. What unfolds in that moment is not a malfunction. It is not an error in the system. It is a signal from a time when being wrong even once could end a life. What survives in the human brain is not simply intelligence or memory or language, but a layered history of survival. Beneath the parts that calculate, plan, and reason lies a structure shaped over hundreds of thousands of years in landscapes that no longer exist in their original form. Ice sheets advancing and retreating, open plains with little cover, forests where visibility disappears within a few steps, nights without artificial light, where darkness is complete and absolute. In those conditions, the difference between noticing and not noticing could define the boundary between survival and extinction. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, the world that shaped the human brain was not stable. It was not predictable. It was a place of shifting climates, migrating animals, and constant uncertainty. The Pleistocene epoch, often referred to as the Ice Age, was not a single frozen moment but a long sequence of cold and warm periods, each bringing new challenges. Glaciers expanded across continents, then retreated. Grasslands turned to tundra, then back again. Water sources appeared and vanished. Entire ecosystems reorganized themselves within the span of a few human generations. In such an environment, there was no permanent solution, no lasting security. Every advantage was temporary. Every strategy had to adapt or fail. And so the human brain evolved not for comfort, but for readiness, not for calm, but for anticipation. It is easy, from a modern perspective, to assume that fear is something to be managed or reduced. It is often described as a problem, a barrier to productivity or peace of mind. But in the conditions that shaped human evolution, fear was not an inconvenience. It was a tool, a highly refined, deeply embedded system for detecting patterns, predicting outcomes, and preparing the body for action. The speed of this system is one of its defining features. Long before conscious awareness forms a clear picture, the brain has already begun to act. Signals travel through pathways that bypass slower, more deliberate processing. The body does not wait for confirmation. It prepares first and evaluates later. This is not inefficiency. It is a design shaped by the cost of hesitation. Scholars still debate the exact balance between inherited neural structures and learned behavior, but the broad pattern remains consistent. Humans are exceptionally sensitive to certain types of stimuli, sudden movement, sharp contrasts, ambiguous shapes in low light, unexpected sounds. These are not random triggers. They reflect a world in which threats rarely announce themselves clearly. A rustle in tall grass could be wind, or it could be something watching, waiting, deciding whether to approach. In such a situation, the safer assumption is not optimism, it is caution. The individual who assumes danger where there is none may waste energy. The one who assumes safety where there is danger may not survive long enough to learn from the mistake. This asymmetry shapes behavior in ways that are still visible today. The mind tends to prioritize potential threats over neutral or positive information. Negative events feel more intense, more memorable, more important. A single moment of fear can outweigh hours of calm. A brief sense of unease can linger long after the environment has returned to normal. The evidence for this bias appears across multiple fields. In psychological studies, people consistently respond faster and more strongly to negative stimuli than to positive ones. In neuroscience, the structures associated with fear and threat detection activate rapidly and with relatively little input. In everyday life, attention is often drawn to what could go wrong rather than what is going right. No single explanation fully accounts for this pattern, but the evolutionary context provides a compelling framework. In a world where threats were real, frequent, and often fatal, the cost of overreacting was small compared to the cost of underreacting. The brain, shaped by countless generations navigating these conditions, reflects that imbalance. There is also a spatial dimension to this inheritance. Darkness, in particular, carries a weight that is difficult to fully explain through modern experience alone. Artificial light has transformed the night into something manageable, even comfortable. But for most of human history, darkness was not simply the absence of light, it was the absence of information. In the dark, vision becomes unreliable, depth is hard to judge, movement is harder to track, the boundaries of the environment blur, sounds carry differently, often seeming closer or more ambiguous than they are. Under these conditions, the brain must rely on incomplete data, filling in gaps with expectation and memory. This is where imagination and fear begin to overlap. The mind does not passively wait for clarity, it generates possibilities. Shapes become figures, sounds become intentions, the unknown becomes populated with potential threats. This process is not a flaw. It is a survival mechanism operating under uncertainty. Even in controlled environments, this response persists. A quiet room at night can feel different from the same room during the day. Familiar spaces take on unfamiliar qualities. The edges of perception seem less stable. The sense of presence of something just beyond clear sight can emerge without any external cause. What remains in these moments is not a literal memory of ancient predators, but a functional echo of the conditions in which the brain evolved. The system does not need to remember a specific threat to behave as if one might exist. It only needs to recognize patterns that once correlated with danger. The persistence of these reactions suggests that evolution does not erase old systems when new ones develop. Instead, it layers them. The more recent capacities for reasoning, language, and abstract thought operate alongside older mechanisms that respond faster and with less nuance. In many situations, these layers work together. In others, they can conflict. A person can know, at a conscious level, that there is no danger, while still feeling the physical effects of fear. The heart rate remains elevated, muscles stay tense, attention refuses to relax. The newer parts of the brain attempt to reassure, to explain, to contextualize. The older parts continue to prepare for action. This tension between knowledge and reaction is one of the defining features of the modern human condition. It reflects not a failure of adaptation, but the coexistence of systems shaped for different worlds. One is designed for a stable, predictable environment with clear rules and minimal immediate threat. The other is built for uncertainty, rapid change, and constant vigilance. The Ice Age world that shaped the deeper layers of the brain is no longer present in its original form. The glaciers have retreated. The large predators that once dominated many ecosystems are gone or diminished. Human societies have developed structures, shelter, technology, social organization that reduce many of the immediate risks of daily life. And yet the brain does not fully update. It does not discard the systems that ensured survival in the past. Instead, it carries them forward, applying them to new contexts that do not always match their original purpose. What emerges from this mismatch is not simply anxiety or fear, but a broader pattern of perception and behavior. The mind scans for patterns, anticipates change, and prepares for outcomes that may never occur. It assigns weight to certain types of information, often without conscious awareness. It reacts first, then explains. This is not a relic in the sense of something obsolete and inactive. It is active, influential, and deeply integrated into how humans experience the world. It shapes attention, memory, emotion, and decision-making. It influences how people interpret events, how they respond to uncertainty, and how they relate to each other. In this sense, the Ice Age is not entirely over. Its physical landscapes have changed, but its psychological imprint remains. The conditions that once defined survival have left traces that continue to guide behavior, often in ways that are subtle and difficult to recognize. The modern human moves through cities, interacts with complex systems, and navigates abstract challenges, but the underlying architecture of the mind still carries assumptions from a very different environment. It expects sudden danger. It prioritizes caution. It prepares for scarcity. It remains alert to the possibility that something, somewhere, is not as safe as it appears. And so, even in a quiet room, with no visible threat, the body can still respond as if the ancient world is just outside the edge of perception, waiting to return. Long before human beings build cities, write laws, store grain, or learn to sleep behind locked doors, survival depends on a far more basic skill. It depends on noticing the branch that moves differently from the others, noticing the sudden silence of birds, noticing the shape in the distance that is almost, but not quite, part of the landscape. In the world that shapes the human nervous system, attention is never neutral. It is selective, hungry, and costly. To notice the wrong thing too often wastes energy. To miss the right thing once can end everything. The landscapes of the Pleistocene do not reward passive observation. They reward minds that can sort quickly through chaos. Wind passes through grass. Herds shift direction. Snow alters familiar routes. Shadows stretch across stone and scrub. Light changes by the minute, and with it the meaning of the land. A patch of ground that appears open at noon becomes concealment by dusk. A narrow valley that feels safe in still air becomes a trap when scent begins to carry. Human beings evolve inside this instability, and the brain responds by becoming a prediction engine before it becomes anything else. This is one of the most persistent features of human perception. People rarely see the world as raw information. They see it as interpreted possibility. The mind is constantly filtering, sorting, and assigning importance, often before conscious thought takes shape. That selective attention is not simply a modern cognitive habit. It appears to be rooted in ancient adaptive pressures, where some categories of information matter more than others. Movement matters, faces matter, direction matters. Sudden contrast matter, unfinished patterns matter. The mind latches onto them because, for a very long time, failure to do so carried real consequences. One of the striking things about human attention is how quickly it is drawn to living forms, or things that resemble them. A shape with two dark points and a vertical symmetry can register as face-like, even when it is nothing more than chance arrangement. A curve in the undergrowth can look briefly serpentine before the mind corrects itself. Scholars still debate how much of this tendency is hardwired and how much is learned through development. But what survives in the evidence suggests that the brain is biased toward detecting agency, even at the cost of false alarms. That bias makes sense in ancestral settings. Mistaking a vine for a snake is inefficient. Mistaking a snake for a vine is much worse. This tendency reaches beyond fear. It shapes social attention as well. Human beings are extraordinarily responsive to eyes, posture, direction of gaze, tension in the mouth, subtle changes in movement. The face becomes one of the most important landscapes any human ever learns to read. In small bands of foragers, where cooperation, trust, rivalry, injury, and status all have immediate effects on survival. Reading expression is not a decorative skill, it is practical intelligence. A quick glance can signal danger, resentment, hunger, attraction, fatigue, or alarm. The brain becomes tuned not only to predators and weather, but to other minds. That sensitivity likely deepens in an Ice Age world where verbal language, though increasingly sophisticated, cannot carry the full burden of coordination. Hunting, movement, shelter, and defense often depend on fast, quiet, shared attention. A group that notices the same signal at the same moment has an advantage over one that does not. A child who learned where adults are looking may learn what matters before fully understanding why. Over thousands of generations, the human mind becomes not merely observant but socially synchronized, tuned to the attention of others as much as to the environment itself. This may help explain why certain forms of ambiguity are so powerful. A half-heard sound, a glance exchanged across a room, a slight delay in someone's response, the uncertain edge of a figure in low light. These things grip attention because uncertainty itself can be costly. The brain does not like incomplete patterns when these patterns might conceal important meaning. It keeps returning to them, circling them, trying to complete the signal in ancestral environments. The persistence may have been useful. The evidence remains incomplete, but it is plausible that individuals who mentally revisited ambiguous cues were sometimes better at catching delayed threats or opportunities. Attention is also shaped by weather and landscape in ways modern life often obscures. Open environments favor distance reading. Forested ones favor close-range alertness. Snow and ice amplify light, erase tracks, then preserve them again. Dry ground records movement differently from mud. Wind can hide footsteps or carry them. Smell changes with temperature. Sound changes with humidity and terrain. For most of modern history, humans stop needing to consciously monitor these variables every day. But the brain that evolves under those conditions becomes exquisitely responsive to environmental clues, and traces of that sensitivity remain. Even now, people often feel different in wide open spaces than they do in narrow enclosed ones. They relax near certain horizons and tense in others. They instinctively scan doorways, stairwells, blind corners, and the edges of crowds. They often prefer seats that allow a clear view of entrances. Many feel calmer with a wall behind them than with open space at their back. These preferences are not universal, and no single explanation fully accounts for them. But they suggest that attention is still influenced by older assumptions about visibility, exposure, and control. One lesser-known detail in research on perception is that human beings can often detect threat-relevant stimuli with surprising speed, even when attention seems occupied elsewhere. Images associated with danger, conflict, or contamination tend to break through awareness more readily than neutral ones. This does not mean the brain is always accurate. It often is not. But it does mean that attentional systems appear to be weighted. They do not treat all incoming information equally. They privilege what might matter most for survival. That weighting likely affects memory as well. Events tied to fear, novelty, or hazard are often stored more vividly than ordinary moments. A single misstep on unstable ice, the smell of a predator's presence, the sight of illness spreading through a group, the location of a dangerous ravine, these are the kinds of details a brain benefits from remembering. In a world with no written record, memory itself becomes part of the survival landscape. It stores the map of danger as much as the map of opportunity. This may be one reason human attention is so vulnerable to interruption by emotionally charged information. Bad news steals focus. Sudden conflict dominates a room. Disturbing images linger longer than pleasant ones of equal intensity. The brain behaves as though it must keep checking whether the threat is resolved. This does not begin with screens or headlines. Modern media simply exploits an ancient architecture already in place. The circuitry was there long before the technology arrived. There is also the matter of children, whose attention often appears restless, impulsive, and easily captured by motion or novelty. In modern educational settings, this can seem like a defect in concentration, but from an evolutionary perspective, the picture is less simple. A young human in a dangerous environment benefits from broad, mobile attention, the capacity to scan rapidly, orient quickly, and respond to change may once have been advantageous long before a world of desks and schedules turned it into a problem. Scholars still debate how directly present-day developmental behavior can be read through ancestral models, but the mismatch is hard to ignore. The human brain is often described as a machine for rational thought, yet much of its power lies in its refusal to be fully rational in the narrow modern sense. It jumps to patterns, it fills in gaps, it prioritizes signal over proof, it commits early, then revises. Under laboratory conditions, this can look like bias. Under Ice Age conditions, it may often have looked like survival. A mind that waits for complete certainty in a dangerous world is not necessarily a wiser mind. It may simply be a slower one. This is why the old environment continues to matter even when it has disappeared. The brain does not evolve for truth in the abstract. It evolves for consequences. It becomes good at detecting what historically mattered most, often and most urgently. That means it is fast where the stakes were once high, and imperfect where false alarms were tolerable. It notices threat before comfort, interruption before continuity, anomaly before routine. It is drawn toward whatever might require immediate action. The result is a species that lives in two attentional worlds at once. One is the modern environment of symbols, schedules, interfaces, and prolonged abstract tasks. The other is far older movement in the periphery, a shift in tone, the expression on a face, the shape of a path, the hidden cost of not noticing soon enough. The newer world demands sustained focus on things that rarely attack. The older one remains ready for things that still might, and underneath both is the same ancient rule: pay attention, because the world changes quickly and not all changes give warning. That rule is not written anywhere, but it lives in the speed of the eyes, in the tightening of focus, in the mind's tendency to return again and again to what feels unresolved. It lives in the fact that attention is never merely about seeing. It is about surviving what comes next. Cold does not merely lower temperature, it changes the logic of life. It alters how far a person can travel, how long a child can survive exposure, how quickly food spoils or freezes, how much fuel must be gathered before dusk, how much strength must be saved for morning. In the long age of ice, climate is not a backdrop to human existence. It is one of the main forces shaping behavior, memory, and judgment. It presses against every decision until caution itself becomes a habit. The phrase Ice Age can be misleading because it suggests one fixed world, endlessly frozen and uniform. The reality is harsher and more unstable. The Pleistocene is a period of repeated climatic swings, with colder glacial phases and warmer interglacial intervals, each restructuring landscapes on a vast scale. Ice sheets advance across northern continents, locking away water and lowering sea levels. Then they retreat, exposing new lands, releasing rivers, and shifting plant and animal ranges. Dry periods spread, wet periods return. What had once been open grassland becomes sparse and brittle. What had once supported one set of animals begins favouring another. Human groups do not live in a still world. They live in a world that keeps changing the rules. For small populations dependent on seasonal movement, animal behaviour, water access, and intimate local knowledge, instability is more than inconvenience. It is a continuous test of perception and judgment. Paths that were reliable last year may become useless. A migration route may fail. A familiar valley may no longer hold water. A winter camp that once offered shelter may now stand too exposed to wind or snow accumulation. In such conditions, memory is valuable. But memory alone is not enough. The brain must also become responsive to signals of change and emotionally sensitive to risk. This is where caution acquires evolutionary weight. A mind shaped in fluctuating climates does not simply ask what is true now. It asks what may go wrong soon. It treats present comfort as fragile. It looks at abundance and wonders how long it will last. What survives in the record suggests that human beings repeatedly endure environmental bottlenecks, local extinctions, and forced migrations. Entire populations may have vanished from certain regions as conditions deteriorate, then later returned when climates eased. The archaeological record is patchy, and scholars still debate the pace and local impact of many of these changes, but the overall pattern is clear enough. Human life during the Ice Age is not a story of steady ascent. It is a story of repeated adjustment under pressure. Pressure favours minds that can make quick trade-offs, stay longer near a diminishing resource, or move now and risk the unknown. Hunt a large animal that could feed many, or conserve energy for smaller, more reliable prey. Shelter in a familiar place that may become exposed overnight, or spend precious strength reaching better cover. These are not abstract choices. They involve fatigue, hunger, weather, social tension, injury, and incomplete information. Under such circumstances, emotional systems are not separate from rational systems. They help make the decision possible. Modern thinking often draws a clean line between feeling and reason, treating emotion as distortion and logic as correction. But in ancestral environments, emotion often functions as compressed information. Fear says the margin is narrowing. Unease says something in the pattern has shifted. Urgency says delay may be costly. Aversion says avoid this before analysis is complete. These signals are not always correct, but they are fast. And speed matters when the environment can turn lethal before full certainty arrives. Cold climates also magnify the cost of error in ways warmer environments do not always do. A bad decision in temperate conditions may lead to discomfort, hunger, or delay. In severe cold, the same error can lead quickly to immobility, exposure, and death. Wet clothing, poor timing, failed shelter, exhausted fuel, or disorientation in wind-driven snow can become fatal with shocking speed. This likely favours not only vigilance but conservatism in behaviour. The cost of novelty rises when the environment is unforgiving. A brain shaped by such conditions may learn to prefer the proven path, the familiar shelter, the tested method, unless pressure forces otherwise. There is a paradox here. Human beings are famously adaptable, capable of moving into deserts, forests, coasts, mountains, and frozen steppe. Yet the more dangerous the world becomes, the more adaptation depends on restraint as much as innovation. Knowing when not to take a risk becomes as important as boldness. The evidence remains incomplete, but it is plausible that many traits now associated with anxiety, hesitation, or overthinking had clear survival value when uncertainty met extreme consequence. A person who checks the sky repeatedly, reconsiders a route, notices small changes in animal behavior, or feels uneasy without being able to explain why may simply be running an ancient survival program tuned to environments where subtle warning signs mattered. One of the less obvious effects of climatic instability is what it does to time perception. In relatively stable environments, planning can stretch farther. In unstable ones, the near future becomes unusually important. The brain learns to live with layered timescales at once immediate survival, seasonal preparation, and long-term movement. It must store the memory of past winters while also reading present signals for what the next few hours may bring. This encourages anticipatory thinking, a habit of mentally rehearsing outcomes before they happen. In modern settings, this can look like worry. In Ice Age settings, it may often have been prudent foresight. Winter in particular is not just a season. It is a test that returns. Long darkness, limited forage, migratory uncertainty, increased energy demands, reduced mobility, and heightened vulnerability create a psychological environment in which anticipation becomes constant. One does not simply endure winter when living close to subsistence. One prepares for it, imagines it, remembers it, fears it before it arrives. The coming season lives in the mind long before it reaches the ground. That may help explain why human beings are so good at dreading future hardship, and so poor at living as though present safety will continue indefinitely. There is also the social dimension of cold decision-making. In dangerous environments, individual judgment is never fully individual. One person's mistake can expose the group. One person's stubbornness can cost fuel, food, or time. One person's injury can redirect everyone's movement. This creates a world in which attention to others becomes inseparable from self-preservation. Reliability matters. Temperament matters. Memory matters. The calm person in a storm. The experienced tracker. The one who remembers the hidden spring or the sheltered ridge may carry enormous weight. Social trust is not merely emotional comfort, it is infrastructure. That may be one reason why humans are so responsive to competence under pressure. Even now, people tend to look for calm authority when threat rises. They gravitate toward those who appear to know the terrain, even when the terrain is metaphorical. This instinct may be far older than institutions. It may reflect a world where survival often depends on whether someone nearby has seen this pattern before and knows what comes next. At the same time, pressure can intensify conflict. Scarcity rarely makes social life gentler. Hunger sharpens grievance. Fatigue shortens patience. Fear narrows tolerance. Small disagreements can become dangerous when resources are tight and options limited. No single explanation fully accounts for the social complexity of Ice Age groups, and the record can only show so much. But what survives in ethnographic analogy and evolutionary modelling suggests that cooperation and tension likely exist side by side. Human beings do not become noble simply because the landscape is harsh. They become more dependent on one another, which is not always the same thing. The brain emerging from such conditions is not designed for permanent serenity. It is designed for calibration under stress. It learns that good conditions can reverse, that abundance can thin, that warmth can disappear behind a single weather shift. It stores not only successful outcomes but near failures, the route that almost trapped the group, the thaw that did not last, the animal herd that failed to return, the season that came too soon. Memory becomes defensive. It does not merely preserve the pleasant, it preserves the costly. This helps explain why humans often feel the emotional force of potential loss more strongly than the quiet pleasure of stability. The mind is not indifferent to safety, but safety does not always leave as deep a mark as threat. One dangerous winter can teach more brutally than 10 mild ones. One famine, one exposure event, one failed migration can reshape behavior across years or generations. Cultural memory likely carries some of this burden, but the deeper cognitive tendency may be older. Protect against recurrence, even if recurrence is uncertain. By the time human beings enter more stable Holocene conditions and begin building the foundations of agriculture and settlement, they do not arrive with blank minds. They arrive carrying a nervous system shaped by fluctuation, a brain trained to read danger into change and to treat caution as wisdom. The glaciers may withdraw, but the habits formed under their shadow do not vanish with them. They remain in the quickened pulse before a storm, in the unease that accompanies scarcity, in the tendency to prepare for the worst while hoping for enough. The cold world does not survive around us in the same way. It survives within the architecture of decision, in the silent calculations made before action, in the emotional weight assigned to uncertainty, in the old instinct that says conditions can turn at any time and that survival belongs not to the calmest mind, but to the one that notices the shift before it is too late. Bad news moves faster through the mind than good news. It catches, lingers, repeats. A minor sign of danger can outweigh a wide field of calm. One cold expression can overshadow 10 neutral ones. A brief silence can feel heavier than an hour of reassurance. This is so familiar that it often seems like a flaw in human thinking, a kind of built-in pessimism. But in evolutionary terms, it may be something closer to an old survival bargain. The brain does not give dark possibilities extra weight because it enjoys misery. It does so because, for most of human history, the cost of ignoring them was often far greater than the cost of dwelling on them. In a dangerous environment, positive information is useful, but negative information is urgent. The sight of fruit on a branch matters. The smell of smoke matters more. A healthy-looking sky is pleasant, but a sudden change in wind direction may demand immediate response. A calm path through grass is reassuring, but one fresh track, one broken stem, one silence where birds were calling moments earlier can reorder attention at once. This difference between useful and urgent becomes deeply embedded in the way the mind assigns priority. It is one of the clearest continuities between ancient survival and modern cognition. People can receive praise and criticism on the same day, yet remember the criticism more vividly. They can experience a long stretch of ordinary safety and still remain preoccupied by one sign that something may be wrong. They can live in comfort while mentally rehearsing threats that never arrive. Psychologists describe parts of this as negativity bias, and while no single explanation fully accounts for it, the deeper logic is easy to recognize. In an ancestral world, failing to fully absorb positive information may be inefficient. Failing to absorb negative information may be fatal. This imbalance shapes not only attention, but learning. A painful event often teaches faster than a pleasant one. Fear can write itself into memory with extraordinary efficiency. A dangerous water crossing, a contaminated food source, the smell associated with a predator's territory, the appearance of illness in a camp. These are the kinds of experiences a nervous system benefits from retaining with force. What survives in both modern experimentation and evolutionary reasoning suggests that the brain is especially good at tagging certain experiences as not to be forgotten. Danger sharpens memory because memory is part of the defense. The Ice Age world almost certainly rewarded this kind of learning. It was not enough to notice danger once. One had to remember it, generalize from it, and act differently the next time a similar pattern appeared. The person who survived a hidden crevasse or a collapsing riverbank was better served by becoming overly cautious around similar terrain than by returning to innocence. The one who misjudged weather once and nearly froze had reason to become vigilant at the first subtle shift in cloud. Wind or air? Scholars still debate the degree to which specific modern cognitive biases can be traced directly to Pleistocene selection pressures, but the broad pattern remains persuasive. Minds shaped by recurrent threat do not update toward optimism by default. They update toward caution. This is where the love of bad news begins to look less like love and more like compulsion. The brain is drawn toward troubling information not because it prefers suffering, but because such information activates systems built to ask one urgent question: does this affect survival? That question does not vanish simply because the modern threat is symbolic, distant, or statistical. A headline, a rumour, a public conflict, a small bodily symptom, an unexplained delay in someone's return message each can trigger a degree of attention that seems disproportionate to the actual danger. The older circuitry does not always distinguish well between immediate physical threat and abstract modern uncertainty. It is responding to signal, not to historical context. There is also a social reason bad news matters. Human beings are cooperative animals, and in small groups, danger often travels through shared awareness. If one person notices trouble, others benefit from noticing it too. Alarm can spread rapidly because group survival sometimes depends on synchronized response. In that sense, negative information is not merely private, it is contagious by design. A startled look, a shift in posture, a change in tone. A sudden silence in conversation, these cues travel quickly because they once had to. This helps explain why stories of threat, betrayal, disaster, and contamination are often so memorable. They attach easily to the mind and move efficiently between people. Long before writing, long before news media, oral cultures likely preserved warning-rich narratives with unusual persistence. A story about danger is not just entertainment, it can be instruction disguised as memory. Avoid this valley in winter. Do not trust that water after flood season. Pay attention to the animal that disappears before the storm. Stay away from the place where the ground sounds hollow. The exact historical continuity between ancient warning tales and modern threat obsession is impossible to prove in a straight line, but the cognitive preference beneath both appears related. The mind privileges what might save a life. One lesser-known feature of negativity is that it can create the illusion of clarity. Threat feels important, and importance feels true. But the two are not the same. A brain tuned to detect danger efficiently is also vulnerable to false positives, overinterpretation, and misplaced certainty. An ambiguous face may look hostile. A coincidence may look intentional. A harmless symptom may feel like the beginning of catastrophe. In ancestral environments, a high false positive rate may often have been acceptable. Better to overreact to 10 harmless signals than miss one real one. In modern environments, especially information-rich ones, this same tendency can create chronic mental strain. The evolutionary bargain is visible here in full. A system optimized to avoid fatal error is rarely optimized for peace. It remains alert, skeptical, and easily captured by negative possibility. That does not make it irrational, it makes it expensive. The same mind that once helped small human groups survive fluctuating climates, predators, conflict, and scarcity may now be overwhelmed by a world generating constant symbolic alarms. Financial instability, social judgment, public outrage, health scares, career uncertainty, distant war, changing norms, digital surveillance. None of these are saber-toothed cats in the grass, but many can activate the same old logic of vigilance. This old logic may also shape morality in subtle ways. Bad acts often seem more psychologically powerful than good ones. Cruelty is more memorable than kindness. Harm stands out against the background. Violations of trust often dominate the social imagination longer than long stretches of cooperation. Part of this may reflect culture and narrative, but part may also reflect survival waiting. In a world where one untrustworthy ally, one negligent partner, or one violent rival could threaten the entire group, sensitivity to harmful behavior would not be a social luxury. It would be part of risk management. At the same time, negativity bias is not absolute. Human beings are also capable of joy, attachment, play, aesthetic pleasure, and deep calm. None of those disappear in the Ice Age, and many of them likely serve adaptive purposes of their own. Group bonding, curiosity, exploration, parental affection, and the reward of successful cooperation all matter. Yet when positive and negative information compete, negative information often receives priority access. That asymmetry is the important point. The brain is not designed to be miserable all the time. It is designed to let bad possibilities cut the line. This may be why reassurance so often feels weaker than alarm. Reassurance is abstract. It often asks the mind to stand down from a heightened state using reason, probability, or trust. Alarm requires much less. It only needs a plausible cue and a nervous system ready to amplify it. Once activated, fear and vigilance can become self-reinforcing. The body tightens, attention narrows, neutral details begin to look meaningful. The environment seems less stable because the observer has already shifted into defensive mode. What begins as caution can become a lens. No single explanation fully accounts for all of this, and the evidence remains incomplete when trying to connect modern emotional habits directly to specific Ice Age pressures. But the convergence between evolutionary logic, behavioral research, and lived experience is difficult to ignore. Human beings do not simply notice bad news. They are built to keep noticing it, to return to it, to store it, to share it, and to prepare around it. That tendency may once have kept ancestors alive through winters, migrations, hidden predators, and social fracture. Today it often keeps people awake at night, and yet the persistence of this pattern carries a strange kind of dignity. It means the human mind is not shallowly broken by fear. It is deeply marked by survival, its attention to what hurts, what threatens, what might fail, is part of a long inheritance from worlds where those questions had sharp edges and immediate consequences. The brain loves bad news in the way a lookout loves the first distant sign of fire, not because the fire is welcome, but because seeing it early may be the only reason anyone survives what comes next. Long before human beings explain fear, they are ruled by it in precise physical ways. The pulse rises, breathing changes, blood shifts toward muscle, attention narrows, digestion slows, skin cools, hearing seems to sharpen around certain frequencies while the rest of the world falls strangely quiet. These reactions feel immediate because they are immediate. They begin not in the reflective, language-rich surfaces of the mind, but in deeper systems built to act first and justify later. The ancient machinery of fear is older than civilization, older than agriculture, older than the species in its present form. Much of it is inherited from a far longer animal history, then modified by the specific pressures of human survival. This is why fear can feel both intelligent and unreasonable at the same time. It is intelligent in the sense that it is fast, patterned, and often adaptive. It is unreasonable in the sense that it does not wait for full evidence. It does not care whether a threat is statistically unlikely, socially embarrassing, or already explained away by logic. Its priority is not accuracy in the philosophical sense. Its priority is readiness. The deeper layers of the brain behave as though the world remains a place where hesitation carries irreversible costs. At the center of this system lies a network rather than a single switch. Popular accounts often reduce fear to one brain structure, but the reality is more distributed. Regions involved in detecting salience, evaluating threat, initiating stress responses, storing emotionally loaded memory, and preparing action all work together. Among them, the amygdala has become famous, sometimes too famous, because it plays a key role in rapidly processing threat-related cues and linking them to bodily response. Yet no single explanation fully accounts for fear by pointing to one region alone. Fear is less a location than a circuit, and that circuit reflects a layered evolutionary history. The speed of that circuit is crucial. When a sudden shape appears in peripheral vision or an unexpected sound erupts nearby, the brain does not calmly wait for complete sensory analysis. It begins orienting almost at once. Muscles prepare, attention redirects, stress hormones begin to move through the body. Only afterward, often fractions of a second later, does more detailed interpretation catch up. This is one reason people can startle before they understand what startled them. The reaction is already underway before the story is formed. In ancestral environments, this speed is not merely useful, it is often the difference between injury and escape. A human moving through brush or open tundra does not benefit from requiring courtroom-level proof before acting. The body must be capable of committing to alarm on sparse data. That does not mean panic is always helpful. It is not. But the capacity for very rapid mobilization is ancient. And what survives in the record of mammalian evolution suggests that it is one of the most conserved and consequential features of nervous systems under threat. This older architecture helps explain why fear often feels as though it comes from below thought. A person may know a bridge is stable, a room is safe, or a social encounter is low risk, and still feel the body resisting. Conscious knowledge sits on top of older, predictive machinery that is not interested in verbal assurance alone. It wants pattern confirmation. It wants repeated safety, familiar context, controlled exposure, and time. Even then, the alarm system does not disappear. It merely learns when not to dominate. One lesser-known detail about fear systems is that they are not only reactive, they are anticipatory. They do not simply respond to present threat but prepare for expected threat, sometimes with very little prompting. This is important because the conditions that shaped human evolution often rewarded readiness before danger fully materialized. A shift in animal behavior, an unusual silence in the environment, the smell of something wrong in the air, a social tension spreading through a group. These are not attacks themselves, but they are cues. A brain that begins to prepare early may gain valuable time. That anticipation is connected to memory. Emotional learning allows the brain to tag certain situations, smells, sounds, places, and expressions as significant long after the original danger has passed. A single frightening experience can make similar cues feel loaded for years. In modern terms, this can look disproportionate. In ancestral terms, it may often have been prudent. The individual who nearly dies in one kind of ravine does not benefit from emotionally neutralizing all ravines by the next season. A degree of durable caution is exactly the point. Scholars still debate how closely laboratory models of fear map onto the lived complexity of prehistoric human life. But the broader logic remains persuasive. Fear conditioning, stress sensitization, and rapid threat detection are not arbitrary quirks. They resemble systems shaped under recurrent hazard, where remembering danger efficiently mattered as much as detecting it in the first place. The evidence remains incomplete when trying to reconstruct exact emotional lives from prehistory. Yet the biological scaffolding is visible enough to make the continuity hard to dismiss. The body's stress response also reveals something important about fear. It is not built for endless activation. It is built for bursts, mobilize, act, recover. In conditions of immediate physical threat, that rhythm makes sense, but when activated too often, or held in place by chronic uncertainty, the same system becomes costly. Elevated stress hormones can disrupt sleep, affect immune function, narrow cognition, and wear down emotional resilience. This is one of the central mismatches between ancient circuitry and modern life. The system that once helps a person survive acute danger can become damaging when symbolic or prolonged stress keeps it partially switched on. Still, the original design is easy to see. Fear recruits the whole organism. Vision changes. Time may seem to slow. Peripheral details vanish. The body becomes less interested in nuance and more interested in action. This narrowing of focus can save a life in a crisis, but it also distorts judgment outside that context. A frightened person may overestimate threat, misread ambiguity, or cling to the first available explanation. The same machinery that sharpens survival under clear danger can reduce flexibility when the threat is uncertain or social. This is why ancient fear systems are not simply about predators. They're about control, unpredictability, and stakes. The deeper circuitry does not require a wolf to respond powerfully. It can be activated by exclusion, humiliation, confinement, illness, or the sudden loss of reliable structure. Human beings are social animals, and threats to belonging or status may sometimes recruit old survival pathways because, in small ancestral groups, social fracture could carry severe material consequences. Exile, distrust, abandonment, or conflict were never purely emotional problems. they could become survival problems very quickly. That does not mean every modern fear maps neatly onto a Stone Age scenario. The temptation to explain everything through evolutionary storytelling is real, and scholars remain rightly cautious about overly simple accounts. But the larger pattern still holds. The brain's threat systems are ancient, fast, bodily, and only partly available to conscious control. They are shaped by environments in which uncertainty often demanded immediate physiological commitment. Modern contexts may differ, but the inherited machinery remains much the same. There is also a deep irony here. Humans often pride themselves on being rational creatures, and in many ways they are. Yet some of the most consequential decisions begin in systems that are not deliberative at all. The body has already leaned away, stiffened, turned, scanned, or recoiled before the mind begins its explanation. Later, the higher functions may step in and reinterpret what happened, sometimes accurately, sometimes not. But the first movement belongs to something older. This older system is not primitive in the sense of being crude. It is highly refined for what it does. It detects patterns quickly, coordinates body-wide response, prioritizes relevant memory, and reallocates energy with impressive efficiency. Its problem is not incompetence. Its problem is context. It evolved where uncertainty often meant immediate physical consequence, and it now operates inside worlds full of symbolic, delayed, and socially mediated forms of threat. The ancient machinery is still doing its job. The world around it has changed faster than the circuitry itself, and so fear continues to arrive with that old authority. It bypasses argument. It speaks in pulse and posture, in heat and tension, in the sense that something matters right now, whether or not reason agrees. Beneath modern language and culture, beneath laws and schedules and electric light, the body still carries a defense system forged in landscapes where one missed signal could mean blood in the snow. Reflection comes later. The deeper machinery is already moving, as it has been for far longer than memory, preparing a modern human body for dangers an Ice Age brain still half expects to meet. For most of human existence, there is no such thing as society in the modern sense. There are no states, no police, no passports, no anonymous crowds, no bureaucracies capable of managing conflict at scale. There are only small groups moving through uncertain landscapes, bound together by kinship, memory, obligation, rivalry, and need. In such a world, the distinction between friend and stranger is not philosophical. It is practical. Trust feeds people, protects children, and distributes risk. Mistrust can be just as necessary. The wrong person, at the wrong moment, can threaten food, shelter, mating opportunities, alliance networks, or the fragile internal balance of a group already living close to the edge. This does not mean that Ice Age humans live in a permanent state of hostility toward anyone unfamiliar. The old image of prehistory as one endless war of all against all is too crude to be useful. What survives in the archaeological and ethnographic record suggests something more complex. Humans are cooperative to an extraordinary degree, capable of sharing food, caring for the weak, transmitting knowledge across generations, and maintaining social bonds under severe pressure. But cooperation is not indiscriminate. It depends on recognition, reciprocity, memory, and repeated interaction. In small populations, where everyone's reliability matters, social judgment becomes part of survival. That judgment likely develops under conditions where outsiders are never neutral by default. A stranger may bring information, exchange, genes, tools, stories, and alliance. A stranger may also bring disease, violence, deception, or competition for already scarce resources. No single explanation fully accounts for how prehistoric humans balanced these possibilities in every region and period. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how much conflict versus exchange characterized particular populations. But uncertainty itself is the point. When the intentions of outsiders cannot be known quickly, caution becomes adaptive. The brain that emerges from such conditions is not built merely to detect predators in the landscape. It is also built to read ambiguity in people, tone of voice, posture, eye movement, confidence, hesitation, deference, aggression, generosity, concealment. These become social clues as important as weather or tracks. A small band world rewards individuals who can make rapid judgments about character, alliance, and threat long before complete proof is available. That does not guarantee accuracy. It guarantees speed, and speed often matters more in dangerous settings than fairness. This may help explain why first impressions can feel so immediate and so hard to undo. A person is encountered once, briefly, and some deeper system has already begun sorting them safe or unsafe, familiar or alien, useful or costly, trustworthy or unpredictable. Modern life often treats these reactions as embarrassingly irrational, and many of them are. They're often shaped by culture, prejudice, personal history, and shallow pattern matching that can mislead as easily as it informs. Yet beneath that modern complexity lies an older logic. Small groups surviving under pressure would likely have benefited from rapidly assessing whether another person fit known patterns of cooperation or danger. This is where the discussion becomes delicate. It is tempting to draw a straight line from ancestral in-group preference to every modern form of tribalism, xenophobia, or ideological sorting. But that line is not clean. Human beings are flexible, culturally shaped, and capable of expanding the boundaries of trust far beyond kin. Trade networks, ritual ties, intermarriage, diplomacy, religion, empire, and law all demonstrate that social identity is not fixed at the scale of the Ice Age band. Scholars still debate how directly ancestral social instincts map onto modern political and ethnic divisions, and it would be careless to treat contemporary prejudice as some simple, inevitable inheritance from prehistory. Culture matters too much, and human variation is too broad for such easy claims. Even so, what survives in the evidence suggests that the brain remains highly sensitive to signals of belonging. People sort themselves quickly into groups, they imitate shared norms, they display loyalty, test boundaries, and become emotionally invested in markers that outsiders may barely notice. Accent, dress, gesture, ritual, humour, taboo, shared memory. These things help define who belongs and who does not. In small ancestral populations, such signals could carry enormous weight. They might indicate whether someone shared obligations, whether cooperation could be expected, whether conflict was likely, or whether scarce resources were about to become more contested. One lesser-known detail in research on group behaviour is how minimal the cues can be. People can form in-group preferences around astonishingly thin distinctions, even arbitrary ones, and begin favouring those coded as similar. That does not prove such tendencies are purely ancient, but it does suggest that the mind is highly ready to organise social reality into circles of trust and distance, in a Pleistocene setting where group membership might genuinely affect survival. That readiness would not be trivial. Trust itself is one of humanity's greatest achievements, but it is expensive. To trust someone is to lower vigilance and accept vulnerability. In stable modern societies, many of those costs are buffered by institutions, Contracts, reputations, courts, borders, and public norms make trust more scalable. In ancestral conditions, there is far less insulation. If someone fails, defects, steals, or turns violent, the consequences are immediate and personal. That may be one reason social memory is so powerful in human beings. Reputation sticks, betrayal lingers, reliability becomes identity. This is not only true for outsiders. The group itself is never perfectly safe. Small band life likely involves jealousy, resentment, sexual competition, shifting status, and unequal contribution. The same closeness that makes cooperation possible also magnifies tension. Human beings do not merely fear strangers. They also monitor allies. They notice unfairness, signs of exclusion, the distribution of food, changes in affection, and the subtle movements of status. The social brain is always reading the weather within the group as carefully as the weather outside it. That constant monitoring may help explain why exclusion feels so physically charged. A cold silence, a withheld gesture, a missing invitation, a public slight. These things can activate disproportionately strong reactions because belonging is not, in evolutionary terms, a luxury. For most of human history, to fall outside the protection of the group is to become drastically more vulnerable. Social pain may recruit ancient threat systems not because the mind is confused, but because in many ancestral circumstances rejection carried material danger. The evidence from neuroscience and behavioral research does not prove a perfect overlap between social and physical pain, but it strongly suggests that human beings are built to treat exclusion as a serious event. This also sheds light on suspicion. Suspicion is often framed as a moral weakness or a sign of insecurity, and sometimes it is. But in ancestral settings, a moderate level of suspicion may have been prudent. Too much suspicion fractures cooperation. Too little invites exploitation. The most adaptive stance is neither blind trust nor permanent hostility, but selective openness trust that grows through familiarity, testing, and repeated evidence. This remains one of the most recognizable patterns of human social life. People rarely offer their deepest trust instantly. They grant it in layers, as though some old part of the mind requires proof earned over time. At the same time, human beings are also unusually capable of extending compassion beyond narrow circles. They adopt outsiders, form alliances, exchange goods and stories across distance, and create identities larger than blood. That flexibility matters because no simple story of suspicion can explain the full human record. Ice Age life likely favors both caution and connection, both boundary and bridge. A group too trusting may not survive. A group too closed may lose access to exchange, mates, information, and resilience. The balance is unstable, and no single explanation fully accounts for how different populations manage it. What seems to endure, though, is the underlying architecture, a mind that treats belonging as safety, familiarity as valuable information, and ambiguity in others as something to be resolved quickly. That architecture remains visible in modern life, though often distorted by institutions, media, and abstract identities the ancestral brain was never designed to navigate. It still reacts to strangers, symbols, accents, crowds, factions, and boundaries with an emotional immediacy that reason alone does not always control. The old world survives here too, not only in fear of predators or darkness, but in the social reflex that says safety is local, trust must be earned, and the unknown person approaching the edge of the fire may be an opportunity or a threat. The human brain learned long ago that survival often depends on telling the difference before the stranger speaks. And even now, in a world of cities and networks and laws, some older part of the mind is still leaning forward, still reading faces, still deciding who belongs near the warmth and who should be watched from across the dark. Hunger is one of the oldest teachers the human species has ever known. It does not simply empty the stomach, it alters attention, narrows patience, sharpens conflict, distorts time, and changes the meaning of almost everything in view. In a world where food cannot be ordered, stored indefinitely, or guaranteed by institutions, hunger is never far from thought. Even on good days it remains nearby, a future possibility, a shadow at the edge of abundance. For most of human existence, calories are not background. They are fate measured in smaller units. The Ice Age world does not offer reliable plenty. It offers opportunity mixed with risk. Herds move, plant foods ripen briefly, then vanish. Rivers freeze. Coastlines shift with sea level. Competition changes by season and region. A successful hunt can provide extraordinary short-term abundance, but it can also fail repeatedly. Small game may be dependable in one landscape and scarce in another. Fat, in particular, matters with unusual force in cold climates, where energy demands rise and lean protein alone can become a problem. Survival depends not simply on eating, but on obtaining the right kinds of energy and the right rhythms, and doing so under uncertain conditions. What survives in anthropology, nutritional physiology, and evolutionary reasoning suggests that the human relationship with food is shaped not by steady moderation, but by repeated fluctuation, feast and shortfall, effort and reward. Anticipation and disappointment likely structure much of the older human experience. The evidence remains incomplete in detail, because no single prehistoric environment can stand in for them all. Yet the broad pattern is hard to miss. Human beings evolve in a world where enough is rarely permanent. That leaves marks. One of those marks may be the peculiar intensity of craving. Modern people often experience desire for sugar, fat, and salt as though it were an embarrassing weakness, some failure of discipline in the presence of abundance. But under ancestral conditions, these preferences make deep biological sense. Calorie-dense foods are valuable because energy is valuable. Sweetness often signals quickly available carbohydrates. Fat signals concentrated fuel. Salt, though context-dependent, can also matter where availability is uneven. A brain that rewards pursuit of such resources strongly is not irrational. It is preparing for uncertainty. This does not mean prehistoric people live in perpetual starvation. They do not. Many foraging populations are skilled, resilient, and often capable of meeting needs with impressive ecological knowledge. But the possibility of shortage is never abstract for long. Bad weather, injury, failed tracking, seasonal gaps, local depletion, intergroup tension, or simple bad luck can turn adequacy into danger. In such a setting, taking full advantage of surplus is not greed in the modern moral sense. It is prudence written into appetite. That old prudence may still survive in the body's uneasy relationship with fullness. People often eat beyond present need when resources feel abundant, particularly when those resources are highly palatable and easy to access. They store, hoard, snack, over-prepare, and feel a strange relief in mere proximity to food. No single explanation fully accounts for modern overeating, and culture, stress, economics, and food engineering all matter enormously. Still, what survives from older evolutionary logic is difficult to ignore. A species shaped by intermittent uncertainty is unlikely to respond to abundance with calm indifference. It is more likely to respond as though abundance should be seized before it disappears. Hoarding, too, has older roots than it first appears. The impulse to store useful things, to dislike waste, to keep reserves just in case, may reflect more than individual temperament. In environments where material security is fragile, extra resources represent future survival. Fuel, tools, dried food, hides, cordage, containers, knowledge of hidden caches all can become decisive when conditions turn. A person or group that consumes everything immediately without preparing for the next disruption is not carefree. It is exposed. This logic may help explain why modern scarcity often feels so psychologically powerful, even when actual deprivation is not immediate. The empty cupboard, the low bank balance, the dwindling supply, the feared interruption of access, these provoke more than practical concern. They can trigger something old and bodily, a sense that safety itself is thinning. The mind begins rehearsing contingencies. Irritability rises. Attention narrows around provision and control. The ancient link between stored resources and survival remains active, even inside economies and systems far more complex than anything the ancestral brain evolved to understand. One lesser-known detail in research on scarcity is how powerfully it can occupy cognition. When resources feel threatened, mental bandwidth contracts, immediate problems dominate. Long-term thinking becomes harder. This can look like poor judgment from the outside, but from another angle it reflects adaptive prioritization under pressure. A brain facing shortage does not benefit from relaxed abstraction. It benefits from focusing on what must be secured soon, in Ice Age conditions. That narrowing may often have been useful. In modern conditions, it can trap people inside cycles of stress that resemble the old survival mode, without offering the same clear path to relief. There is also a social dimension to food and scarcity that reaches deep into human behavior. Sharing is one of the most important features of human survival, especially in foraging contexts where success is uneven and interdependence is high. A large kill may be distributed widely. Care for the young, the injured, or the old may depend on such social systems. Yet sharing does not erase tension. It creates it as well. Who contributes? Who receives? Who withholds? Who remembers past generosity? Who resents imbalance? These are not small matters. They shape trust, status, and the moral structure of the group. This may be why humans respond so strongly to perceived unfairness around resources. Unequal distribution can feel immediately offensive even when the absolute quantities are sufficient. Some of that is cultural, some political, some personal. But beneath it may lie an older survival logic. In small groups, unfair access to food or protection is not merely insulting. It can alter chances of survival and reproduction. The emotional force attached to fairness may reflect, at least in part, this old material seriousness. Hunger also changes the emotional weather of a group. Fatigue spreads faster when fuel is low. Patience shrinks. Risk tolerance may either collapse or become reckless. Tempers shorten. Hope becomes harder to maintain. What survives in ethnographic analogy and modern physiology suggests that energy shortage does not just affect the body individually. It reorganizes social life. Under such conditions, planning for future scarcity is not paranoia. It is governance at the scale of the band. This old background of uncertainty may still echo in the modern experience of never enough. Enough time, enough money, enough food, enough security, enough recognition. The object changes, but the emotional structure often feels similar. Satisfaction is brief. Relief does not last. The mind begins scanning for the next possible shortage before fully inhabiting present adequacy. Scholars still debate how directly these modern patterns map onto ancestral scarcity, and there is real danger in turning every contemporary anxiety into a simple evolutionary relic. Yet the resemblance remains striking. The nervous system often behaves as though sufficiency is temporary and must be defended before it vanishes. That defensive orientation can become especially distorted in modern food environments, where ancient reward systems meet industrial abundance. The body that once benefited from seeking concentrated energy now encounters endless engineered stimulation. Craving systems, portion instincts, and stress-related eating patterns interact with a world designed to trigger them. The result is not proof that the body is badly made. It is evidence of mismatch. A system built for uncertain calories is now surrounded by constant access, and it often behaves accordingly. Still, there is something more haunting beneath all this than simple appetite. It is the memory of winter without literal memory, the pressure of living organisms that no resources fail. Human beings carry that pressure not as a detailed recollection of ancient famine, but as a set of tendencies: take more while it is here, keep some hidden away, feel uneasy when reserves shrink, distrust permanence, prepare even in times of calm. These habits may once have protected lives under shifting skies and unstable seasons. They may also now produce dissatisfaction in worlds where the signal of scarcity is psychological as often as physical. The part of the brain that still lives in the Ice Age does not assume the pantry will remain full. It does not assume the hunt will succeed tomorrow, or that the weather will stay kind, or that the group will always provide. It leans toward accumulation, vigilance, and relief purchased in advance. In that sense, modern craving is not only about pleasure, it is about insurance. The ancient mind reaches for more because somewhere inside its inherited logic, more has always meant one thing above all else may be enough to survive what comes next. Safety is one of the strangest things the human mind ever has to learn. It does not come naturally, at least not in any simple or permanent form. A body shaped by uncertainty does not automatically know what to do with prolonged comfort. It may enjoy comfort, seek it, build entire civilizations around it, and still remain unable to fully trust it. That is one of the quiet contradictions at the center of modern life. Human beings have become remarkably successful at constructing protected environments. Yet the deeper layers of the brain often continue behaving as if protection were temporary, fragile, and slightly suspicious. This is easiest to see not in moments of real danger, but in moments when danger is absent and the mind begins inventing it. The room is quiet, the bills are paid, the door is locked, the weather is mild, nothing obvious is wrong, and yet some part of the nervous system refuses to settle. It scans for what has been missed. It reviews old conversations for hidden threat. It projects forward into possible failure. It searches the body for symptoms, the silence for meaning, the calm for the first sign that calm is about to end. In an environment of relative safety, the machinery of vigilance does not simply switch off. Very often, it keeps working until it finds something to justify its own activation. This does not mean the brain is defective. It means it is carrying assumptions from a world in which comfort was often the brief interval between problems rather than the permanent baseline of life. In Ice Age conditions, relaxation had to be conditional. A sheltered place could become exposed with a weather shift. A full stomach meant little about the next several days. A quiet night could become dangerous within minutes. The human nervous system was not built in a world where nothing is wrong was reliably true for very long. It was built in a world where the absence of immediate threat did not guarantee future safety, and where failing to stay partly prepared could be costly. That old logic may help explain why some people feel uneasy when life becomes too still. Rest can feel deserved and pleasant at first, then strangely intolerable. Calm becomes boredom, boredom becomes irritation, and irritation begins looking for an object. The mind reaches for stimulation, conflict, novelty, or worry. Scholars still debate how much of this reflects evolved vigilance, how much reflects personality, and how much is shaped by modern culture. But the pattern is familiar enough to be striking. There are people who seem more comfortable solving problems than inhabiting peace, as if motion itself feels safer than rest. One lesser-known detail about stress systems is that they can become habituated not only to danger, but to activation itself. A body long exposed to vigilance may come to treat arousal as normal. When life grows quieter, the quiet can feel not soothing, but unnatural. Almost like the eerie silence before an unseen event. In ancestral environments, that sensitivity may sometimes have been useful. Sudden calm in the landscape can indeed mean something. Birds stop calling, herds shift direction. Wind drops. The environment changes register before a storm or a predator. A nervous system that distrusts unusual stillness is not entirely irrational. It may simply be carrying forward an old association between calm and concealed consequence. This may also help explain the peculiar discomfort many people feel in environments that are objectively safe but perceptually incomplete. A hotel room in a new city, a suburban house at midnight, a silent office after everyone has gone, an empty train platform. These places are usually secure, yet they can provoke a low, persistent unease. The brain seems to dislike not only danger, but uncertain ownership of space. Familiarity matters. Repetition matters. Known sounds. Known exits. Known rhythms of movement, these help reassure the older systems that the environment is mapped. Safety is not just about barriers, it is about pattern recognition. That is why routines can feel so stabilizing. Repeated habits, familiar places, predictable sequences, and small rituals all reduce ambiguity. They tell the nervous system what usually happens here and what does not. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. In unstable environments, reliable patterns are precious. A known water source, a well-used shelter, a familiar seasonal route, a group ritual before movement or rest. These do more than organize life. They reduce cognitive load and lower the cost of uncertainty. Modern routines may look trivial by comparison, but some of their emotional power may come from the same deeper need they make the world legible. At the same time, the mismatch between ancient caution and modern safety creates a strange problem. The body may react to symbolic or unlikely danger, as though it were immediate and physical. A difficult email, a delayed message, a vague symptom, a social misunderstanding, a late payment, a headline about distant instability. None of these are wolves at the edge of camp, but the body can still tighten around them. The old systems are reading stakes, uncertainty, and loss of control. They do not always care whether the threat has claws. They care whether it feels unresolved. This is where comfort itself can become paradoxical. Modern life often offers unprecedented physical security, while generating constant low-grade cues of instability. Central heating, electric light, supermarkets, medicine, and secure walls coexist with economic precarity, social comparison, abstract bureaucracy, digital surveillance, perpetual news, and the possibility of being judged by invisible crowds, the body receives mixed signals. On one level, it is safer than almost any human body before it. On another, it is continuously exposed to small prompts that keep ancient vigilance partially engaged. No single explanation fully accounts for the resulting unease, but it makes sense that comfort can feel incomplete when threat signals arrive in forms the ancestral brain was never designed to sort. There is also a moral dimension to this discomfort with ease. Many cultures inherit old suspicions about luxury, idleness, and softness. Some of this comes from religion, class history, and social discipline, but part of it may also resonate with older instincts. Environments that are too easy can reduce readiness. They can dull awareness, weaken skill, and make sudden hardship harder to survive. In Ice Age terms, complacency is dangerous. The person who stops paying attention because the last several weeks were good may be precisely the one caught unprepared when conditions reverse. The evidence remains incomplete, but this may be one reason why human beings so often romanticize struggle even while trying to escape it. Some deeper layer of the mind still equates effort with preparedness and comfort with vulnerability. Modern psychology often treats anxiety as an excess of future-oriented thought, and that is often true. But from another angle, anxiety may sometimes be the ancient refusal to accept that present calm is sufficient proof of future safety. It is the mind asking whether the shelter will hold, whether the group will remain stable, whether the supply will last, whether the silence means peace or concealment. In a stable civilization, these questions can become exhausting. In a volatile prehistoric world, they may often have been what kept people alive. Even pleasure can be affected by this old caution. Some people struggle to enjoy good fortune without immediately imagining its loss. Success invites fear of reversal. Love invites fear of abandonment. Fullness invites fear of depletion. This can seem tragic or neurotic, but it may also reflect a nervous system shaped by conditions where gain and loss stood close together. The feast could be followed by famine. The warm season could close quickly. The healthy child could fall ill. The trusted ally could die or leave. To enjoy without bracing may once have been a luxury the environment did not reward. And yet human beings keep building comfort anyway. They build homes, customs, institutions, and technologies designed to make the world more predictable than nature ever was. This is not a rejection of ancient wiring, but an answer to it. Civilization may be read, in part, as a vast collective attempt to soothe the nervous system by reshaping the environment walls against weather, law against violence, storage against hunger, medicine against chance, ritual against uncertainty. But the deeper architecture remains. The walls rise, the alarms are installed, the food is stocked, and still some quiet part of the brain stands watch. The part of the mind that still lives in the Ice Age does not assume comfort is permanent. It treats ease as provisional, calm as something to be checked, safety as a pattern that must prove itself again and again. That is why relief can feel so brief and vigilance so durable. The modern world may offer softness, but the inherited brain still remembers, without remembering, that softness once ended quickly. And so even in warmth, even in shelter, even in the silence of an undisturbed night, some older sentinel remains awake, listening for the first crack in the illusion that comfort will last. Winter begins before it arrives. It begins in the mind, in the long rehearsal of what cold will require, what darkness will remove, what scarcity will expose. For creatures living close to the edge of environmental uncertainty, The season is never only a date on a calendar. It is an approaching condition that alters behavior long in advance. The body starts conserving. The group starts planning. Routes are reconsidered. Shelters are checked, repaired, abandoned, or reinforced. Fuel matters differently. Time matters differently. Memory itself becomes seasonal, reaching backward to ask what happened the last time the light shortened and the air turned against the skin. This is one of the older habits that may still survive in modern human psychology, the tendency to live partly in anticipation, to feel the future pressing into the present, to prepare emotionally for hardship before hardship has arrived. In the modern world, this often looks like anxiety or overthinking, but in Ice Age terms it may have been one of the central forms of intelligence, a mind that can simulate coming conditions, remember past failures, and adjust behavior early has a profound advantage over one that waits for certainty. If winter kills, then the useful brain is not the one that reacts best to winter. It is the one that begins preparing while autumn still looks generous. The Pleistocene world rewards this kind of anticipatory cognition because its most dangerous pressures often arrive slowly enough to detect, yet quickly enough to punish delay. Shorter days alter movement, animal migration patterns shift, plant resources narrow, water behavior changes, wind grows sharper, and the margin for error shrinks with it. In some regions, cold intensifies exposure risk. In others, it limits prey, reshapes access routes, or reorganizes the landscape in ways that make familiar knowledge less reliable. The exact conditions vary enormously across time and place, and scholars still debate the full range of adaptations used by different human populations. But what survives in the record suggests a repeated truth survival often belongs to those who can feel the future early. That phrase matters. To feel the future is not the same as to think about it abstractly. It is more bodily than that. The nervous system begins behaving as though tomorrow has already started influencing today. A person can be warm and still prepare for cold, fed and still orient toward future hunger, safe and still scan for what might threaten that safety later. This predictive style of living may be one of the deepest marks left by unstable climates. Human beings do not merely inhabit the present, they are constantly leaning ahead, trying to close the gap between uncertainty and action. One lesser-known feature of human cognition is how much memory is organized not simply to preserve the past, but to improve prediction. The brain stores prior experiences in ways that allow rapid simulation of similar future events. In a world of recurring seasonal stress, this becomes invaluable. The memory of where snow drifted deepest, where wind cut hardest, where game failed to appear, where shelter held, where illness spread in close quarters, these are not museum pieces in the mind. They are tools, carried forward and reactivated when conditions begin to resemble old danger. Memory, in that sense, is less about nostalgia than rehearsal. This may help explain why certain forms of dread feel so powerful even when nothing has happened yet. A person notices the first signs of trouble and feels the emotional response before the full event unfolds. The deadline has not yet arrived. The illness is not yet diagnosed. The storm is still on the horizon. The relationship has not yet broken. And still the body begins to tighten round possibility. It is tempting to call this irrational, but that would be too simple. In ancestral environments, anticipatory stress may often have been part of what made preparation possible. Waiting to feel concern until danger was fully present could mean waiting too long. Of course, anticipation is costly. A nervous system too tuned to the future can struggle to rest in the present. It may keep generating scenarios, revisiting contingencies, scanning for signs of reversal. The same predictive gift that helps secure survival can also become a burden, especially in environments where many threats are abstract, delayed, or beyond personal control. No single explanation fully accounts for why some people live more heavily in anticipated futures than others, and temperament, experience, and culture all matter. Yet the broad inheritance is difficult to ignore. The human brain appears built not only to respond to pressure, but to host it in advance. There is also something important about darkness here. Winter in many Ice Age environments is not simply colder, it is dimmer, longer, more psychologically enclosing. Reduced light changes movement, visibility, and mood. It alters the use of space. It limits foraging opportunities and stretches the hours in which danger cannot be clearly seen. Fire becomes more valuable, not only as warmth, but as certainty. Around a controlled light source, the world becomes bounded again. Outside it, uncertainty thickens. For a brain evolved in such conditions, darkness is never a neutral absence. It is a compression of information and a widening of possibility at exactly the moment when survival margins are already thinning. This makes anticipation socially important as well. Winter is not managed by isolated individuals alone. It is managed collectively through planning, cooperation, role memory, and shared discipline. Someone must remember where the better shelter lies. Someone must know when to move, when to stay, when to conserve effort, when to risk it. Children must be watched differently. The injured or old may require more support. Resource use becomes more morally charged because mistakes affect everyone. What survives in ethnographic analogy and evolutionary reasoning suggests that seasonal stress amplifies both group cohesion and group tension. Preparation binds people together, but it also exposes every weakness in foresight, generosity, and reliability. This may be one reason cultural calendars, rituals, and seasonal customs become so emotionally powerful in later human societies. Even long after direct Ice Age conditions fade, humans continue to mark transitions in the year with unusual seriousness. They prepare, gather, stock, celebrate, and remember according to cycles of light and scarcity. Agriculture transforms these patterns, but it does not erase them. Some deeper layer of human life still seems organized around seasonal thresholds, around the feeling that times are changing and that behavior must change with them. Scholars still debate how much of this is ecological habit and how much is deeper evolutionary inheritance, but the continuity is striking. The memory of winter may also survive in more subtle habits of mind. Many people feel uneasy when resources begin to diminish, even modestly. Many become reflective, vigilant, or emotionally altered in periods of shortening light. Many experience relief not merely in present comfort, but in knowing that provision exists for what comes later. This is not always pathological. It may reflect an ancient logic in which security is measured not by how one feels today, but by how prepared one is for what today is becoming. Modern civilization complicates this old logic. Heating systems, electricity, global supply chains, medicine, and insulated homes weaken the direct force of season in many parts of the world. Yet the nervous system does not become fully seasonal blind. It still notices darkness, reduced activity, altered rhythms, and the subtle emotional tones of transition. Even where winter is mild or mostly symbolic, the mind often continues to respond as if some old page of the year has turned and a more careful mode is now required. This older mode is deeply connected to imagination. Humans are unusually capable of projecting themselves forward into hypothetical circumstances. That capacity supports planning, art, engineering, and law. But it may also have been sharpened in part by recurring ecological strain. To imagine the future vividly enough to act before it arrives is one of the species' great advantages. It is also one of its great discomforts. The same mind that can anticipate shelter needs can also anticipate humiliation, failure, loss, and death long before any of them occur. The tool does not remain confined to weather and migration. It expands into every domain of life. And so the memory of winter continues, not as a literal recollection of mammoth steppe or glacial wind, but as a mental posture. Be ready. Do not assume the present will hold. Notice what is changing. Store what matters. Read the light. Watch the horizon. The part of the brain that still lives in the Ice Age does not wait passively for hardship to arrive. It begins living with hardship while it is still far away, because in the old world that distance could close quickly. The season is always coming from somewhere, and the mind that survives is the one that starts hearing its footsteps before the ground begins to freeze. Long before human beings can write warnings down, they learn to place them inside stories. A dangerous crossing becomes a remembered tale. A winter of unusual hunger becomes a lesson attached to a name, a place, a sequence of actions not to repeat. A stretch of coastline where the water behaves strangely may become surrounded by cautionary language, ritual avoidance, or inherited unease. In worlds where formal records do not exist and survival depends on transmitting practical knowledge with emotional force, story is never just entertainment. It is storage. It is instruction shaped to survive memory. This matters because human beings do not remember dry information equally well. Facts attached to danger, novelty, taboo, wonder, or social consequence tend to endure. A list of instructions can fade. A vivid narrative about what happened to those who ignored them travels farther. The human mind, tuned by ancient pressures, is especially responsive to information that feels costly, dramatic, and meaningful. That responsiveness may be one reason storytelling becomes such a durable human technology. It takes what must not be forgotten and binds it to image, emotion, and sequence. The Ice Age brain would have had strong reasons to favor such a system. Knowledge in dangerous environments is often highly specific, yet difficult to preserve abstractly. Which valley floods after delayed thaw? Which animals change movement before a storm? Which plants matter in lean months? Which caves stay warmer? Which roots become death traps in certain winds? Which smells or sounds predict danger? Some of this can be learned by direct experience, but direct experience is expensive. It costs time, injury, and sometimes lives. A group that can pass on compressed survival information through memorable stories gains an advantage over one forced to rediscover everything the hard way. What survives in the ethnographic and archaeological records suggests that oral cultures are not poor substitutes for writing. They are highly refined systems of memory, often far more structured than outsiders assume. Rhythms, repeated motifs, sacred prohibitions, ancestral names, place-linked narratives, and ritual performance all help preserve information across generations. Scholars still debate exactly how far particular myths or folk memories may reach into deep prehistory, and the evidence remains incomplete when trying to map any one modern tale directly onto an Ice Age event. But no single explanation fully accounts for the durability of warning-rich narratives, unless one recognizes their practical function. Stories endure in part because they carry consequences. This may explain why so many old narratives, across many cultures, are saturated with caution. Do not go there after dark. Do not wander beyond the firelight. Do not ignore the signs in the sky. Do not mock forces larger than yourself. Do not trust the inviting place that has swallowed others before. At one level, these are moral or supernatural stories. At another, they may preserve ecological or social memory in emotionally gripping form. A haunted marsh may once have been a place where people disappeared in fog or unstable ground. A forbidden grove may protect a crucial resource or conceal some past danger. A water spirit that drags the careless below may encode real knowledge about current, cold shock, or seasonal flooding. The supernatural language can change over time, but the underlying function may remain partly protective. One lesser-known idea in research on traditional knowledge is that stories can act as mnemonic maps. They do not merely convey lessons, they help organize landscape itself into remembered meaning. A place is not just a location, it is a node in a web of remembered events, risks, and obligations. For mobile human groups in unpredictable environments, this is profoundly useful. The land becomes narratively indexed. One does not simply travel through terrain, one travels through inherited memory. The hill where the wind turned, the crossing where someone failed to return, the shelter that saved people during an early freeze, the place where game vanished before catastrophe. Story turns geography into something portable inside the mind. This also gives story a social function beyond survival in the narrow sense. Shared narratives align attention. They tell a group what to fear, what to honor, where to hesitate, whom to trust, and what patterns count as warnings. In a dangerous world, this matters enormously. Individuals may notice things, but cultures decide which noticed things deserve lasting emphasis. A community that repeatedly tells stories about greed, isolation, arrogance, neglect, or broken reciprocity may be doing more than entertaining itself. It may be setting behavioral guardrails around pressures that once threatened group stability. Hunger, unfairness, betrayal, poor timing, ignoring elders, neglecting preparation. These are not merely moral failures in such contexts, they can be survival failures. This is one reason stories built to warn often feel more emotionally compelling than stories built only to comfort. They grip old circuitry, they animate the same mind that already prioritizes danger, ambiguity, and future consequence. Even now, people remember the cautionary tale better than the smooth reassurance. Tragedy leaves cleaner edges in memory. This does not mean human culture is obsessed only with fear. Joy, humor, beauty, and love are present everywhere. But warning narratives possess unusual staying power because they are attached to stakes. Over time, as climates shift and lifeways change, the original practical meaning of some stories may blur. A rule born from one landscape can persist after the landscape itself changes. A taboo linked to an ancient material risk may survive as custom long after the original explanation is forgotten. This is where superstition begins to overlap with memory. People continue repeating protective behavior without always knowing why. From the outside, this can look irrational. From the inside, it may reflect accumulated caution whose first cause has disappeared into time. The story remains even after the environment that made it necessary has altered beyond recognition. That process may help explain why human beings are so responsive to inherited unease. Certain places feel wrong before any evidence appears. Certain acts feel forbidden before their logic is clear. Certain warnings, even stripped of proof, carry emotional authority because they arrive through tradition rather than direct experience. Modern rationality tends to treat this as an obstacle, but it may once have been a life-saving shortcut. Not every member of a group needed to relearn a dangerous lesson personally if story could deliver the emotional weight in advance. There is, of course, a cost. Story can preserve real warnings, but it can also preserve false ones, outdated ones, exaggerated ones, or those repurposed for control. Not every inherited caution reflects a real ecological threat. Some become tools of hierarchy, exclusion, or fear for its own sake. Scholars remain careful about romanticizing oral tradition for this reason. It is not pure wisdom untouched by distortion. It is human culture, carrying both insight and error. Yet even that imperfection tells us something important. The brain seems willing to keep precautionary material long past its expiration date because the ancestral logic behind precaution favors retention over premature dismissal. This old preference lives on in modern life more than most people notice. Families pass on anxieties without always naming them. Communities inherit phrases, habits, and aversions detach from their original conditions. Nations build identity around remembered dangers. Media systems thrive by narrating threat in forms the brain cannot easily ignore. A rumor spreads quickly not only because it is new, but because it might matter. Warning remains one of the most efficient ways to recruit human attention. The same species that learn to survive by reading tracks and weather also learn to survive by reading stories. Both are pattern systems. Both convert fragments into expectation. Both try to answer the same question: what happens here, and what should be done before it happens again. In that sense, culture does not replace ancient survival instinct. It extends it. It takes the alertness once focused on the immediate landscape and projects it across generations, turning memory into narrative and narrative into guidance. The part of the brain that still lives in the Ice Age does not trust information merely because it is logical. It trusts information that feels consequential, memorable, and socially reinforced. Story provides exactly that. It wraps danger in sequence, gives uncertainty a face, and lets one person's costly lesson become many people's preparation, around old fires, under long darkness, with children listening and landscapes half known beyond the light. The human species learns one of its most enduring skills: how to turn fear into memory, and memory into a tale strong enough to outlive the people who first needed the warning. The brain is never alone in carrying the past. It speaks constantly to the body, and the body answers in rhythms older than thought. A sudden fright raises the heart before language forms. A long period of uncertainty alters sleep, appetite, immunity, posture, and pain. Isolation can feel heavy in the chest. Shame can heat the skin. Grief can weaken muscle and dull movement. What modern people often describe as mental strain is frequently something more total than that. It is the whole organism shifting into an old mode of survival. This is one of the clearest signs that the ancient inheritance is not confined to abstract cognition. The part of the mind that still lives in the Ice Age is not a detached psychological ghost. It is embodied. It changes breathing patterns, muscle tone, digestion, hormone release, attention, and recovery. In a dangerous world, this makes perfect sense. Survival is never just about thought. It is about coordinated physical readiness. A human being who spots danger but cannot mobilize is not much better off than one who never noticed it at all. The stress response sits at the center of this relationship. When threat is detected, whether it is immediate, ambiguous, or anticipated, the body begins reallocating resources. Energy shifts away from slow maintenance and toward fast action. Glucose becomes more available. Inflammation changes. The heart works differently. Sleep becomes lighter or more fragmented. The body prepares not for comfort but for response. In short bursts, this system is brilliant. It allows a fragile animal to survive environments full of uncertainty, predators, competition, weather, and injury. But the brilliance has a condition attached to it. It was built for episodes, not permanence. That condition matters because the modern world often provokes the old system without allowing it to complete its original cycle. There is alarm, but no sprint, vigilance, but no clear enemy, anticipation, but no decisive resolution. A person lies still in bed while the body behaves as if something in the environment requires action. Another sits in an office chair with tightened shoulders, shallow breath, elevated pulse, and a jaw set against invisible danger. The threat may be symbolic, social, bureaucratic, or delayed, but the body often does not fully care. It is responding to uncertainty, stakes, and lack of control using machinery shaped long before any of those things were mediated through screens and institutions. Sleep reveals this mismatch with unusual clarity. In a genuinely dangerous environment, deep sleep is vulnerable sleep. A species living with predators, unstable weather, infants, territorial conflict, and shifting noise in the night does not benefit from becoming insensible too easily or too uniformly. Human sleep is complex, layered, and sensitive to context. Even now, unfamiliar places often produce lighter, more broken rest. Worry intrudes before sleep because the brain is still trying to solve tomorrow. Night waking can follow periods of stress as though some ancient watchfulness has resumed its shift. Scholars still debate the exact evolutionary roots of these patterns. But what survives in physiology and behavior suggests that human rest was never designed to be fully indifferent to danger. One lesser-known detail in sleep research is the so-called first night effect, where part of the brain appears to remain more alert in a new environment. The effect is not total, and it should not be oversimplified, but it hints at something old. Unfamiliarity changes the depth of trust the body grants to sleep. A sheltered room in a modern building may objectively be safe, yet the nervous system behaves as though caution is still appropriate until patterns become known. That is not a malfunction. It is a leftover logic from worlds where sleeping too deeply in the wrong place could carry a real cost. The body also keeps score through posture and muscle tension. Fear is not only a feeling but a physical stance. Shoulders rise, the neck tightens, the abdomen hardens. Breathing becomes shallower and faster, reducing the sense of vulnerability around the soft center of the body while preparing the upper frame for quick reaction. Over time, this can become habitual. A person may not notice how often the body is braced until some unexpected moment of relaxation reveals the contrast. The old system has been holding the line in the background all along. This bodily memory is particularly visible after repeated stress or trauma. Experiences involving helplessness, sudden danger, instability, or violation can leave traces that outlast the event itself, not only in thought but in startle response, vigilance, sleep pattern, sensory sensitivity, and autonomic rhythm. Modern clinical language describes some of these patterns carefully and with good reason, but the broader evolutionary context matters too. A nervous system that learns danger deeply may be doing exactly what it was shaped to do, preserve the lesson in forms that are hard to ignore later. The problem is not that the system learns too well. The problem is that the modern world may keep reactivating the lesson in fragments, without giving the body the kind of resolution it evolved to recognize. Social anxiety belongs in this story as well. Fear of judgment, exclusion, ridicule, or scrutiny can feel surprisingly physical because it is physical. The face warms, the stomach drops, the hands change temperature, the voice tightens, the body prepares as if exposure itself were dangerous. From a purely modern perspective, this can seem excessive, but in small ancestral groups, reputation and belonging are tied to material safety. To be rejected, mocked into low status, distrusted, or cut off from support is not simply uncomfortable. In some circumstances, it can threaten access to food, mates, protection, and alliance. No single explanation fully accounts for every form of social fear, but it is plausible that some of its intensity reflects older stakes carried forward into safer but still emotionally legible settings. The immune system may also be part of this inherited conversation. The body does not separate cleanly between physical threat, social strain, and ecological uncertainty. Chronic stress can alter inflammatory processes, wound healing, illness susceptibility, and recovery. In an unstable environment, this interconnectedness may once have helped the organism prioritize urgent response over longer-term maintenance. Yet under prolonged modern strain, the same trade-offs become expensive. The body sacrifices tomorrow's restoration for today's readiness, again and again, even when the emergency never fully arrives in the old physical sense. This may be one reason modern people often describe themselves as exhausted but unable to rest. The body is depleted, yet the nervous system remains unconvinced that it is safe to disengage. The watch is still being kept. Some old internal sentinel believes the environment remains unresolved. There may be no snow outside, no predator beyond the firelight, no rival band nearby, no dwindling herd to track, but the organism behaves as though something consequential remains unfinished. There is also the matter of pain. Pain is not merely damage, it is interpretation, prediction, context, and caution combined. Bodies under stress often ache differently. Minor sensations become louder, recovery slows, the system becomes less willing to dismiss signals. In evolutionary terms, this may have protective value. A body in a risky environment benefits from erring on the side of guarding injury. Yet in modern conditions, especially under chronic stress, that same amplifying caution can become a burden. The body continues to prioritize warning even when the environment no longer requires the same degree of defensive living. And yet the old inheritance is not only a source of distress. The embodied brain also carries forms of resilience shaped by that long past. Humans can mobilize quickly, endure harsh conditions, recover from acute strain, adapt to instability, synchronize under pressure, and extract meaning from ritual, touch, movement, warmth, and social presence. The same body that becomes vigilant also becomes soothed by repeated signals of safety, familiar voices, rhythmic motion, shared meals, warmth, darkness under trusted shelter, predictable routine. These may not erase old circuitry, but they speak to it in a language it understands. That may be the deeper truth beneath the tension between body and world. Civilization often addresses the mind first, with explanation, information, and reassurance. But the older systems listen for something else. They listen for breathing that slows, spaces that become familiar, food that remains available, companions who stay, nights that pass without disruption, patterns that repeat gently enough for trust to grow. The body believes safety gradually, through experience, not merely through argument. The part of the brain that still lives in the Ice Age is written into pulse, muscle, sleep, and hormone. It is there in the flinch, the tightening jaw, the half-waking in the dark, the ache that grows under uncertainty, the relief of warmth and company after strain. Long after the glaciers recede, the body still keeps their lessons in circulation. It prepares, braces, scans, and remembers. And even in a world of climate control and electric light, it continues quietly asking the same old question it once asked beneath the cold stars: are we safe enough yet to let go? Civilization does not erase the ancient mind. It negotiates with it. That may be one of the quietest truths in human history, and one of the most important. Fields are planted, walls are raised, laws are written, granaries are sealed, calendars are formalized, roads are laid down, and still the deeper architecture beneath all of this remains recognizably old. Human societies become larger, denser, and more organized. But the nervous system moving through them is still carrying assumptions shaped in landscapes of scarcity, exposure, and immediate consequence. The project of civilization, in part, is not to replace that system, but to restrain it, redirect it, and build enough external structure around it that life no longer depends so completely on constant personal vigilance. This is what makes agriculture so significant beyond its obvious material effects. Farming changes more than food. It changes time. It changes risk. It changes the relationship between effort and reward, between planning and survival, between the individual and the group. A hunter in a fluctuating landscape often faces uncertainty in direct, immediate forms. A farmer faces uncertainty too, but it becomes organized through season, storage, territory, labor obligation, and delayed return. That shift matters to the brain. It begins asking for patience in new ways, demanding restraint over impulse, repetition over sudden movement, and endurance over reactive flexibility. Yet agriculture does not create certainty. Crops fail, weather turns, pests spread, storehouses burn, floods come at the wrong time, drought stretches longer than expected. The evidence from early settled societies suggests not the end of anxiety, but its transformation. The old fear of immediate scarcity becomes the more systematized fear of failed harvest, property loss, debt, raid, taxation, and social collapse. In many ways, civilization enlarges the scale of vulnerability even as it reduces some of the older daily threats. The brain is asked to trust infrastructures that no single person can fully control. That trust is the real revolution. In small ancestral groups, survival depends heavily on what can be directly seen, remembered, carried, and defended in settled civilization. Much of survival depends on invisible cooperation. The irrigation channel must hold. The granary must be protected. The authority must be legitimate enough to organize labor or defense. Neighbors must follow norms. Strangers must become predictable through law. This requires something extraordinary from the human mind. It requires extending trust beyond immediate kin and familiar companions into systems, institutions, symbols, and agreements. This is not easy for a brain shaped in the Ice Age. Institutions are abstract. Laws are delayed. Bureaucracies are impersonal. They lack the direct legibility of a known face by the fire or a familiar trail through a remembered valley. And so civilization develops techniques to make large-scale trust feel more tangible. Ritual, shared religion, public punishment, boundary markers, architecture, records, oaths, and repeated customs all work in different ways to stabilize expectation. They do not merely organize society, They calm ancient uncertainty by making the environment seem more predictable than raw nature ever was. One lesser-known way to think about civilization is as a vast external memory system. Writing remembers what individuals might forget. Property boundaries remember who belongs where. Calendars remember when to plant, harvest, pay, fast, move, or gather. Law remembers precedent. Roads remember movement. Cities remember concentration. In evolutionary terms, this is remarkable. Humans begin offloading the burden of survival from the nervous system alone into durable structures outside the body. The result is not freedom from ancient instinct, but a partial transfer of responsibility. The world itself is redesigned to do some of the calming. That redesign, however, comes with friction. The ancient mind is highly responsive to immediate feedback. Civilization often runs on delayed consequences. A person can work now and eat later, follow a law now and avoid punishment later, save seed now and benefit months later, pay into a shared system and receive protection only if crisis comes. These are cognitively demanding arrangements. They require inhibition, abstraction, and patience capacities humans possess. But capacities layered over older systems that prefer visible cause and effect. It is one thing to flee a predator. It is another to trust that proper conduct inside a legal order will preserve one's future safety. This may help explain why civilization always feels, to some degree, effortful. It requires training the organism against some of its faster impulses. Do not strike the rival immediately. Do not consume the reserve now. Do not seize the resource by force if a norm governs access. Wait your turn, save for winter, obey the schedule, accept the invisible rule. These are triumphs of social coordination. But they are also disciplines imposed on brains that did not evolve originally for life inside massive anonymous systems. Scholars still debate how much settled life changed temperament at the population level over long periods, but the behavioral tension is visible everywhere in history. Order must be taught, repeated, enforced, and symbolically renewed because the underlying organism does not simply generate it effortlessly. Cities intensify this conflict. They gather strangers into close proximity, increase status comparison, magnify noise and sensory load, and force the nervous system to tolerate constant partial exposure to others. At the same time, cities offer extraordinary safety advantages: walls, markets, specialization, stored food, organized defense, medicine, and shared labor. They are, in a sense, anti-Ice Age machines, collective structures built to neutralize the volatility of raw environment. But they are also places where ancient social instincts can become overstimulated. Reputation matters, hierarchy matters, crowd behavior matters, exclusion matters. The old tribal brain enters the metropolis and does not disappear. It simply finds new objects. Law, too, can be understood as an answer to ancient threat. In a small band, conflict resolution may depend on reputation, kinship, memory, and immediate negotiation. In larger societies, that is not enough. Violence must be monopolized, revenge restrained, and dispute moved into formal channels. This is a profound achievement, but one that must contend constantly with older emotional machinery. Anger wants immediacy. Fear wants preemption. Loyalty wants partiality. Law asks for delay, evidence. Procedure, abstraction. It is civilization telling ancient instinct that not every threat should be answered in the old way. Religion and ritual often play a parallel role. They organize uncertainty into forms the mind can bear. Harvest rites, funerary practice, taboo, purification, oath, sacred boundary, seasonal festival all may provide more than symbolic meaning. They create repeated patterns that reassure the nervous system that the world is not wholly chaotic. In dangerous environments, repeated collective action can reduce fear by making the future feel inhabitable. No single explanation fully accounts for religion's persistence, but part of its power may lie in how effectively it binds community, memory, morality, and uncertainty into shared forms the ancient mind can trust. Still, civilization never completely wins. Famine returns, states collapse, roads become vulnerable, laws fail, markets panic, neighbors turn on one another, epidemics expose how thin routine can be. In such moments, the older brain reappears with startling speed. Hoarding begins, suspicion rises, group boundaries harden, rumor spreads, threat perception sharpens. The civilized layer remains, but the ancient substratum becomes suddenly visible beneath it, as if history were not a straight line away from prehistory but a surface stretched over it. This does not mean civilization is fragile in a simple sense. It means it is ongoing work. Every norm, institution, and habit of restraint must continually cooperate with minds that still carry quicker, older reactions. The great human experiment is not the replacement of instinct by reason. It is the construction of worlds in which reason has enough support to govern more often. Streets are lit so darkness carries less threat. Grain is stored so hunger becomes less immediate. Law is codified so revenge becomes less necessary. Schools are built so memory can widen beyond oral warning. Medicine develops so illness stops feeling quite so much like fate. Each of these is a civilizational answer to ancient pressure. And yet beneath every answer the old question remains. Am I safe? Is my group secure? Will there be enough? Can this order hold? The part of the brain that still lives in the Ice Age continues asking, even when surrounded by walls, records, markets, and rules. Civilization does not silence that voice. It gives it structures to lean on. Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes, under strain, it is not. What history reveals again and again is that human beings do not leave their ancient instincts behind when they build societies. They build societies because those instincts are not enough on their own. Civilization is the long collective attempt to calm the nervous system by taming environment, distributing risk, and making the future more predictable than it was for almost all of human evolution. It is a magnificent achievement. It is also unfinished. The old architecture remains underneath, watchful as ever, even while standing in the middle of fields, courts, temples, and cities it could never have imagined. By this point, the idea has gathered force. Modern humans may carry a brain that is not merely old in a general evolutionary sense, but specifically shaped by long ages of cold, instability, social dependence, and recurrent threat. It is an elegant idea, and like many elegant ideas, it is easiest to overstate at exactly the moment it becomes most persuasive. This is where the evidence matters most. Not the comforting sweep of narrative alone, but the harder question beneath it. What, exactly, can be supported? What can be reasonably inferred? And where does the story begin to outrun the record? The answer is neither simple endorsement nor dismissal. Archaeology, evolutionary biology, neuroscience, and psychology do not merge into one seamless account. They approach different timescales, different kinds of evidence, and different standards of proof. Bones and tools can tell us something about movement. Diet, environment, injury, and adaptation. Comparative anatomy can suggest what kinds of pressures shape the species over deep time. Neuroscience can reveal how fear, reward, memory, and stress operate in living brains. Behavioral research can show recurring patterns in perception, bias, cooperation, and threat detection. What none of these can do, on their own, is produce a perfect documentary of ancient emotional life. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how tightly present-day cognition can be tied to specific Pleistocene conditions. Still, some broad foundations are strong. Human beings are products of evolutionary processes. The nervous system did not appear in modern form under modern conditions. It was shaped across long spans of prehistory in contexts where survival depended on reading threats, navigating social alliances, managing resource uncertainty, and responding quickly to environmental change. That much is not seriously controversial. Nor is it controversial that many brain systems involved in fear, salience, reward, attachment, and stress are deeply conserved, layered atop older mammalian and vertebrate architecture rather than invented anew in recent history. Neuroscience offers some of the clearest support for this layered picture. Threat detection often occurs rapidly and partly outside conscious control. Emotional memory can be unusually durable. Stress response systems mobilize the body before reflective thought has finished interpreting events. Reward circuits strongly favor calorie-dense foods, novelty, social validation, and patterns associated with survival value. These are not speculative literary flourishes. They are observable features of living organisms. The question is not whether such systems exist. The question is how to interpret why they take the forms they do. Evolutionary psychology attempts to answer that question by asking what kinds of recurrent ancestral problems certain traits may have solved. This approach can be illuminating, but it can also become dangerously convenient. Almost any modern behavior can be wrapped in an adaptive story if one is not careful enough. People fear snakes because snakes were dangerous. People like gossip because reputation mattered. People overeat because scarcity was common. Sometimes these claims are plausible. Sometimes they are thin, just so stories, persuasive mainly because they sound intuitively right. Good scholarship resists that temptation. It asks whether the proposed adaptation is supported by comparative evidence, developmental evidence, cross-cultural patterning, ecological realism, and testable predictions. That caution matters here because the Ice Age brain idea can become too neat if left unchecked. Not every human fear is a fossil from the mammoth steppe. Not every bias reflects a prehistoric adaptation. Culture, individual development, trauma, institutions, technology, and historical contingency all shape the mind powerfully. A person's tendency toward vigilance may reflect temperament, upbringing, chronic stress, learned environment, and immediate conditions as much as any ancient inheritance. To reduce the whole complexity of modern psychology to Pleistocene leftovers would be a mistake, and yet the convergences remain striking enough that the broader framework still holds value. Archaeology shows that late Pleistocene humans repeatedly lived through fluctuating climates, shifting ecologies, migrations, predation risk, injury, and social interdependence on small scales. Isotopic evidence, faunal remains, landscape reconstruction, and settlement patterns all point to lives structured by environmental uncertainty and adaptive flexibility. Human bodies and technologies changed in response to cold, mobility demands, and variable food access, burials, ornaments, long-distance exchange, and evidence of care for injured individuals suggests social worlds rich in meaning, dependency, and memory rather than simple reflexive survival. From neuroscience, there is strong evidence that the brain privileges threat-relevant stimuli, stores emotionally salient events efficiently, and uses predictive processing rather than passive observation. That last point is especially important. Modern models increasingly treat the brain as a prediction engine, constantly generating expectations about the world and updating them against incoming sensory evidence. In that framework, anxiety, vigilance, and rapid threat interpretation are not random flaws. They are features of a system designed to reduce dangerous surprise. This maps well, though not perfectly, onto the ancestral logic of uncertain environments where failure to predict mattered. Behavioral research adds another layer. Humans often exhibit negativity bias, loss aversion, attentional capture by threat, sensitivity to exclusion, rapid social categorization, and discomfort under ambiguity. None of these proves an Ice Age origin on its own, but taken together, they fit a creature for whom immediate safety, group belonging, and future provisioning were recurrent problems over evolutionary time. The pattern is suggestive, even when any single data point remains open to multiple explanations. One lesser-known source of useful evidence comes from mismatch research. The principle is simple. Traits that may once have been adaptive can become costly when environments change faster than biology does. Craving energy-dense foods in a world of scarcity is helpful. The same craving in a world of constant industrial abundance may become harmful. Vigilance in a predator-rich or conflict-prone landscape is useful. The same vigilance in a world of chronic symbolic stress may contribute to anxiety and exhaustion. Preference for familiar social circles may stabilize small group cooperation. The same preference in large pluralistic societies can harden into exclusion and tribal hostility. Mismatch does not prove the original function beyond doubt, but it helps explain why old tendencies can persist in altered settings. Even the evidence for trauma and chronic stress fits this broader frame, though carefully. Modern research shows that repeated stress can sensitize alarm systems, alter sleep, change attention, and make the body more reactive to future cues. That does not tell us exactly how Pleistocene humans felt, but it does show that human nervous systems are built to learn danger deeply and to remain shaped by conditions long after the immediate threat has changed. In unstable ancient environments, that kind of durable calibration may often have been protective. In contemporary life, it can become burdensome when reactivation is frequent and resolution incomplete. Archaeology also gives us cautionary limits. Material remains can show what people did more easily than what they felt. A projectile point embedded in bone tells us violence happened, not what dread felt like the night before conflict. Seasonal occupation layers can suggest planning, not the exact emotional texture of anticipation. Even burials, though emotionally evocative, must be handled carefully. Meaning is present, but meaning is not infinitely transparent. The temptation to project modern interior life too confidently into deep prehistory is always there. Responsible interpretation leaves room for silence in the record. This is why the strongest version of the argument is not that modern humans literally think exactly like Ice Age hunter-foragers, or that every contemporary fear can be reverse-engineered into one ancient scenario. The stronger version is more modest and more durable. It is that the basic architecture of human emotion, attention, and stress regulation was shaped under conditions radically different from those of modern industrial life, that many of our faster, deeper reactions still reflect priorities that make sense in those ancestral conditions, and that the mismatch between old circuitry and new environments explains a great deal about why modern life feels psychologically strange even when materially safe. No single explanation fully accounts for the whole human mind. Gene-culture coevolution matters, historical change matters, Childhood environment matters, social structure matters. But the Ice Age inheritance remains one of the most useful deep frames for understanding why the species behaves as it does. It reminds us that reason rides on older systems, that comfort is evolutionarily recent, and that many of the mind's most frustrating tendencies are not arbitrary defects, but traces of solutions carried forward into the wrong century. In the laboratory, this appears as bias, hypervigilance, salience weighting, conditioned response, and reward asymmetry. In the archaeological record, it appears as planning under uncertainty, care under pressure, movement through difficult landscapes, and repeated adaptation to unstable climates. In ordinary life, it appears as the stomach tightening before bad news, the relief of routine, the persistence of dread before winter-like transitions, the body's refusal to believe reassurance too quickly, the strange feeling that safety must keep proving itself to be real. That is the real clue from trauma and the lab alike. Human beings are not detached intelligences drifting above history. They are living organisms built by pressures that remain partly active inside them, whether or not the original landscape still exists. The evidence does not permit a fairy tale of perfect certainty, but it does support something more interesting than certainty. It supports a portrait of the mind as layered, adaptive, imperfect, and haunted in lawful ways by the environments that shaped it. The brain is modern enough to build microscopes, satellites, and cities. It is also ancient enough to hear a sudden noise in the dark and, for one sharp instant, feel the whole old world return. The modern world is not a wilderness in the old material sense, yet the brain often treats it as one. Not because streets are full of predators or because winter waits just beyond the glass, but because the deeper systems of threat detection were never designed to distinguish neatly between physical danger and the more abstract forms of instability that now dominate human life. A crowd can feel like exposure. A deadline can feel like pursuit. Public shame can feel like banishment. Financial uncertainty can feel like famine delayed by paperwork. The landscape has changed, but the organism reading it is still using ancient categories: safety or risk, belonging or exclusion, enough or not enough, control or helplessness. This is one of the strangest features of modernity. The human species succeeds brilliantly at reducing many of the immediate dangers that shaped its evolution, only to generate new environments that keep the same old circuits active in subtler, more continuous ways. Traffic is not a predator, yet it recruits vigilance, spatial tracking, threat anticipation, and bodily bracing. News cycles are not weather in the literal sense, yet they deliver a stream of warning signals, reversals, and signs of instability that the mind absorbs with familiar urgency. Deadlines are not winter, yet they narrow time, force prioritization, and provoke anticipatory stress in ways that resemble the old pressure of approaching hardship. This is what makes the modern environment feel, in a psychological sense, like false wilderness. It surrounds the organism with cues that resemble ancestral danger enough to activate ancient responses, but rarely allows those responses to resolve in the ways they once did. A person cannot flee a social hierarchy as cleanly as they might flee a physical predator. They cannot store enough security against every economic fluctuation. They cannot entirely map the digital territory through which reputation, opportunity, and conflict now move. The result is a nervous system repeatedly mobilized by threats that are real enough to matter but too abstract, prolonged, or diffuse to confront directly. One lesser-known detail in modern stress research is how powerfully uncertainty itself drives physiological strain. The body often tolerates known hardship better than unresolved anticipation. A clear injury can be easier to bear than waiting for the test result. A defined conflict can be easier to metabolize than an ambiguous social fracture. In ancestral settings, this makes sense. Ambiguity is dangerous because it blocks action. If one does not know whether the movement in the grass is wind or predator, the body must remain prepared for both. Modern life is saturated with this kind of ambiguity. Not enough to force a decisive response, but enough to keep the system partially activated. Digital life intensifies the problem. The brain evolved to read immediate social cues from limited groups in physical space. It now encounters vast numbers of symbolic signals detached from the scale it was built to manage. A message left unanswered, a shifting tone in text, a flood of public opinion, the permanent visibility of other people's success, the possibility of judgment by strangers, these are not old problems in their exact form, yet they recruit very old sensitivities: belonging, status, exclusion, rivalry, and uncertainty become continuous rather than occasional. The campfire circle has become immense, invisible, and permanently awake. This may help explain why so many modern experiences feel exhausting, in ways that are hard to justify purely by physical effort. Sitting still in front of a screen can drain the body, because the ancient systems underneath the task are doing far more than the posture suggests. They are scanning for error, reading symbolic threat, anticipating evaluation, managing uncertainty, suppressing reaction, and attempting to maintain social standing in contexts too large and abstract for instinct to fully comprehend. The organism feels hunted by obligations it cannot see, and its fatigue is real even when its muscles have barely moved. Crowds are another example of false wilderness. Human beings are social, but the ancestral social environment was not typically one of dense anonymity. A city street places the brain among hundreds of unfamiliar individuals, each unread in more than a superficial way, each a potential source of collision, judgment, competition, contagion, or unpredictability. At the same time, urban life offers safety, cooperation, and opportunity on a scale prehistory could never support. The contradiction is constant. The body moves through built environments that are statistically safer than wild landscapes while still carrying a vigilant system tuned to unknown others and constrained movement. This is why some people find crowds exhilarating and others quietly overwhelming. The ancient social brain does not always know whether density means support or danger. News media may be the clearest false wilderness of all. The ancestral mind benefits from paying close attention to local danger. The modern mind is exposed to curated signals of distant catastrophe with no corresponding increase in control. Fire, plague, conflict, scandal, collapse, outrage, contamination, betrayal, extreme weather, political fracture. These arrive not as occasional local warnings but as a global stream. The negativity bias that once helped a small group survive nearby threats is now recruited continuously by events beyond personal reach. No single explanation fully accounts for the emotional toll of modern information systems, but one part of it is surely this mismatch: the brain is trying to react to a whole planet as if it was still responsible for scanning the edge of camp. Time pressure works in a similar way. For most of human history, many urgent problems were concrete and ecologically grounded. Reach shelter before dark, secure water before movement becomes costly, prepare before winter, return before predators begin to roam. Modern deadlines are often symbolic, but the body can react as if they were equally material. Heart rate rises, attention narrows, appetite changes, sleep fragments, and the mind begins to rehearse consequences. The organism is not asking whether the threat has teeth. It is asking whether failure matters. If the answer feels like yes, older systems step in. There is also the strange modern condition of being surrounded by safety infrastructure while remaining emotionally unconvinced by it. Locks, insurance, medicine, savings accounts, laws, food supply chains, emergency services, and digital maps all reduce danger in ways that would have seemed miraculous to ancestral humans. Yet many people still live with persistent vigilance. They check repeatedly, prepare excessively, imagine breakdown, and struggle to accept that systems will hold. From one angle, this can seem ungrateful or irrational. From another, it reflects a brain whose ancient operating principle is not trust first, doubt later, but the reverse. The mind shaped in unstable worlds does not surrender vigilance simply because civilization has become sophisticated. The metaphor of wilderness matters because wilderness is not only about danger, it is also about unreadability. A true wilderness is a place where patterns matter, where signs are partial, where one is exposed to forces larger than oneself, and where error can be costly. Much of modern life recreates this structure psychologically even when it eliminates it physically. Bureaucracies are unreadable, markets are unreadable, public opinion is unreadable, algorithmic systems are unreadable. A person can live in a heated apartment, order food with a gesture, and still feel as though they are walking through terrain they do not understand, surrounded by hidden rules and consequences. The old brain recognizes the structure if not the surface. This is why symbolic threats can feel embarrassingly physical. A missed payment can tighten the chest. A public embarrassment can flush the face like imminent combat. A job interview can provoke sleeplessness resembling a night watch before danger. The body is not mistaken in the shallow sense. These events can affect survival in indirect modern ways. Income, status, belonging, and institutional access are real. But the intensity of the reaction often reveals something older beneath the modern form, a nervous system that still treats uncertainty and exclusion as conditions that could strip away protection and leave the individual exposed. And yet there is harsh ingenuity in this old carryover. The same brain that misfires in false wilderness is also the brain that notices hidden patterns in modern complexity, anticipates consequences, and navigates unstable systems with caution that is often justified. Hypervigilance is costly, but indifference can be costly too. The ancient mind is not simply maladapted, it is overgeneralized. It keeps applying survival logic beyond its original domain because, in some sense, the world remains dangerous enough to reward partial continuity. The difficulty is calibration. How much vigilance belongs here? Which alarms are ghosts and which are still warnings? That question has no permanent answer because the modern environment is itself unstable. Systems fail, institutions break, supplies falter, crowds turn, economies contract, illness spreads. In those moments, the false wilderness becomes briefly real again, and the old brain no longer looks outdated, it looks prepared. This is one reason ancient circuitry persists so stubbornly. The world modernizes unevenly and reverses unpredictably. Complete trust has never been entirely safe. The part of the brain that still lives in the Ice Age moves through the modern world as though it were a landscape of concealed edges. It reads symbolic danger as if it might become bodily, social uncertainty as if it might become exile, delayed scarcity as if it might become hunger, and public chaos as if it might spill into the immediate camp. In many ways it is wrong, in some ways it is not. What matters is that the system is still running, still reading, still preparing. The wilderness may now be made of traffic lights, headlines, invoices, passwords, meetings, and crowded trains. But the old mind enters it with familiar caution, carrying forward the same ancient rule it learned under colder skies: stay alert, because the world is never as tame as it first appears. Modern humans often speak as though they have left prehistory behind, as though intelligence, technology, and institutions have carried the species safely out of the old world. In one sense, that is true. Ice sheets no longer define most human movement. Mammoth Steppe is gone. Night can be defeated with a switch. Hunger, in many places, is buffered by systems too vast for any one person to fully comprehend. Human beings can cross oceans in hours, alter genes, look into the deep past of their species through bone fragments and molecules, and speak instantly across continents. And yet none of this changes the deeper fact that the organism accomplishing these things is ancient in its core design. It walks forward carrying a nervous system shaped not by the last few centuries, but by an almost unimaginable stretch of uncertainty, cold, darkness, and dependence. That is the final tension running beneath everything else. The human species is culturally modern and biologically old. It can build worlds its deeper circuitry never anticipated, then feel strangely unfit inside them. It can surround itself with security and still brace for collapse. It can possess abundance and still think like scarcity is coming. It can know, intellectually, that a threat is symbolic, statistical, or distant, while the body reacts as though something immediate is moving at the edge of the fire. This is not hypocrisy. It is layering. The present sits on top of older systems that remain active because the past did not disappear cleanly enough for them to be retired. The part of the brain that still lives in the Ice Age is not merely a poetic phrase. It is a shorthand for this layered reality, a mind that predicts danger quickly, privileges negative information, stores threat-rich memory efficiently, fears exclusion with bodily seriousness, craves concentrated resources, distrusts prolonged comfort, and leans toward preparation even when preparation becomes exhausting. These tendencies vary across individuals and cultures, and no single explanation fully accounts for every mind. But taken together, they describe a species still carrying the marks of ancestral survival into worlds of concrete, code, and electric light. What survives in the human record suggests that this inheritance is not accidental. The environments that shaped Homo sapiens as defined by instability. The late Pleistocene is a place of movement, fluctuating climates, risky dependence on skill and cooperation, and mortality that can arrive fast from weather, injury, illness, hunger, conflict, or simple miscalculation. A brain moulded under those pressures is unlikely to become serene by default. It is more likely to become quick, suspicious, socially attentive, future-oriented, and reluctant to trust ease. These are not the traits of a creature built for paradise. They are the traits of a creature built to keep going in a world that keeps changing the terms of survival. This is why human life still contains so many strangely prehistoric feelings even when the setting is modern. The unease in darkness, the relief of warmth and enclosure, the heightened alertness around strangers, the need to know where exits are, the comfort of routine, the physical force of shame, the instinct to store more than seems necessary, the mind's tendency to rehearse loss before it arrives, the way bad news displaces good news with indecent speed, the difficulty of believing in safety for very long without checking it again. These are not random defects scattered through an otherwise rational machine. They are coherent remnants of a system that once had good reasons to behave this way. Scholars still debate the details, and rightly so. Caution is necessary whenever deep prehistory is used to explain modern psychology. Culture is powerful, development is powerful, history is powerful. Institutions shape minds, and trauma can rewrite the body in ways no general evolutionary story can neatly predict. The evidence remains incomplete in many places, especially when one tries to convert broad adaptive logic into precise narratives about how ancient humans felt from moment to moment. Yet uncertainty at the edges does not erase the larger pattern. Human beings are still built from older priorities than the modern world often acknowledges. That realization can be read pessimistically, as though the species is condemned to drag primitive impulses through increasingly complex environments. But that would be too narrow. The same inheritance that produces anxiety also produces preparedness. The same threat sensitivity that overwhelms also protects. The same bodily memory that stores fear also stores warmth, ritual, companionship, and relief. Human beings are not only haunted by their past, they are also stabilized by it. They know how to gather under pressure, read one another quickly, adapt to changing conditions, and construct systems aimed at calming the very alarms they inherit. Civilization itself may be one of the grandest examples of this ancient intelligence trying to solve the problems it carries within it. There is something humbling in that. This species does not stand outside nature as a clean triumph over its origins. It remains marked by them at every level. The polished surface of modern life covers an organism that still reads weather in mood, security in stored resources, danger in ambiguity, and survival in belonging. Behind every password and policy, every schedule and supply chain, every apartment tower and hospital corridor, there is still a body quietly asking older questions. Is there enough? Who is with me? What changed? What is approaching? How quickly must I act? Those questions are not obsolete. They are ancestral, and in altered forms they still govern much of what people call normal life. This is why modern progress does not feel like a straight ascent into ease. Every gain creates new mismatches, new false alarms, new ways for older circuitry to be triggered by settings it cannot fully interpret. But progress also creates new possibilities for understanding. For perhaps the first time in the species' history, humans can begin to recognize the deep age of their own reactions. They can see that panic is not always irrational in origin, that restlessness may reflect an organism shaped for vigilance, that dread can be the future-sensing habit of a mind trained by repeated uncertainty, and that many forms of unease are less personal failures than echoes of ancient design meeting unfamiliar conditions. To understand that is not to solve it completely. The body does not become modern merely because the intellect has learned an evolutionary explanation. But the recognition matters. It widens the frame. It makes human contradiction more legible. It explains why people can build comfort and distrust it, seek peace and feel restless in it, crave certainty and still rehearse collapse, love society and flinch from strangers, live in abundance and imagine famine in symbolic form. The species is not inconsistent by accident. It is living across time, carrying into each ordinary day a structure assembled under older skies. And so the human being remains, in the deepest sense, a traveller from ice, not frozen in the past, not trapped there, but shaped there, measured by it, carrying forward its lessons in reflex, appetite, memory, and fear. The glaciers retreat, the mammoths vanish, the camps become towns, the towns become states, the states become networks glowing through the night, and still the old inheritance walks inside them all. It scans, it braces, it hopes, it prepares. It mistrusts comfort just enough to keep watch. It remains, even now, an ancient mind moving through modern weather. The lights are on now almost everywhere. Roads hold through the dark. Food waits behind doors. Weather can be forecast. Illness named. Danger mapped in numbers and warnings and signals. The world, in so many ways, has become softer than the one that made us. And yet softness never fully reaches the deepest rooms of the mind. Somewhere beneath language, beneath routine, beneath the daily confidence of modern life, the older world still breathes. It is there in the quick turn toward a sudden sound, in the slight relief of a locked door, in the instinct to save a little more. Check once more. Wait for another sign before truly relaxing. It is there in the body's hesitation before sleep in an unfamiliar place, in the unease of silence that feels too complete, in the strange seriousness with which human beings still gather against the dark. The part of the brain that lives in the Ice Age does not remember glaciers as images. It remembers them as pressure, as the need to prepare before conditions turn, as the habit of reading uncertainty with respect, as the refusal to believe that safety, once achieved, no longer needs guarding. It remembers long winters without knowing their names. It remembers scarcity without a single clear scene. It remembers that life was once narrow, fragile, and always one mistake away from change. And that may be why human beings remain such uneasy creatures even at the height of their achievements. Not because they are broken, but because they are layered. They're full of old instructions written for landscapes that no longer exist, yet still faintly shape every room they enter. The modern world often asks them to be calm in ways their ancestors could rarely afford. It asks them to trust systems too vast to see, strangers too numerous to know, futures too abstract to touch. Sometimes they manage it beautifully, sometimes they do not. But perhaps there is something quietly noble in that tension. To be human is not to leave the old world behind. It is to carry it forward without fully understanding how much of it still lives inside the body, to make warmth out of memory, to build shelter against inherited weather, to stand in safety and still feel the ancient pulse that once kept small groups alive under cold stars. And when night comes, as it always does, people still close doors, lower voices, seek familiar lights, and gather near one another almost by instinct, not because the saber-toothed world waits outside, but because some ancient part of the species still feels that survival has always depended on this warmth held together against the dark, attention shared, time endured until morning. In that sense, the Ice Age has never entirely ended. It has only moved inward, becoming rhythm, instinct, caution, and memory carried through every century since. And the human story, for all its inventions, still sounds faintly like footsteps crossing old snow, moving carefully toward a horizon that cannot be fully trusted, but followed anyway,